The Sacred Texts of Islam. As we begin our study, we first turn to a brief introduction to the sacred texts of Islam. The purpose here is to acquaint the reader with the sacred texts of Islam in order to understand their places within the authority structure of Islam. Many of the references in this book will come from these various sacred texts. The Quran. The first and most well-known of Islam's sacred books is the Quran. The Quran is the foundational holy book of Islam and was conveyed entirely by Muhammad, the founder and prophet of Islam. Quran literally means recitation or reading in Arabic. The Quran is comprised of 114 chapters called surahs. Throughout this book, whenever a portion of the Quran is cited, following the citation it will say surah followed by the chapter, verse, and translation. The Quran may somewhat be viewed as the Bible of Islam in that it is the primary holy book of Islam. The Quran, however, is not the only source of sacred or even inspired traditions in Islam. While the Quran is the only text within Islam that is said to be the literal words of Allah, of equal importance to all Muslims, is what is called the Sunnah. The Sunnah. The Sunnah in Arabic literally means, a clear or well-trodden path. It refers to whatever Muhammad said, did, condoned, or condemned. It is the record of Muhammad's sayings, customs, teachings, or the example that he left for all Muslims to follow. Muslims view Muhammad as being the perfect example for all human beings. This doctrine is spelled out quite clearly in the Quran. If you love Allah, then follow me, Muhammad, Surah 331, Shakir. Ye have indeed in the Apostle of Allah a beautiful pattern of conduct for anyone whose hope is in Allah and the final day. Surah 33:21, Yusuf Ali. Whatever Muhammad did or said, therefore, becomes the basis from which to model all life and belief. What must be understood regarding the Sunnah is that it is equally important to the Muslim as the Quran. This is because it is the Sunnah that interprets the Quran. Without the Sunnah, the Quran cannot be properly understood. In fact, many aspects and practices of the Islamic religion are not even mentioned in the Quran but are found only in the Sunnah. So, it is both the Quran and the Sunnah that together form the basis for the beliefs and practices of Muslims everywhere. In this sense, both the Quran and the Sunnah are believed to be inspired and authoritative. Sources of the Sunnah. The Sunnah is mined primarily out of two different types of Islamic literature. The first and most important of the two types of traditions is what is called hadith literature. Hadith literature is specifically the record of the sayings of Muhammad. Secondly, there is what is called sirat or sirah literature. Sirat literally means biography. So the Sirat Rasul is a biography of the Apostle or Prophet Muhammad. There are many ancient and modern biographies of Muhammad's life. The most popular English translation of an ancient Sirat is Ibn Ishaq Sirat Rasul, The Life of Muhammad, translated by the noted Orientalist, A. Guillaume. Besides these two types of literature, there are also histories of Islam and commentaries on the Quran by early scholars called tafsir. When I speak of these various types of literature collectively in this book, I will simply use the general term, Islamic traditions. Hadith literature. For the purpose of this study, the hadith literature will probably be the most crucial of the various Islamic traditions to understand. This is because so much of Islamic belief and practice, particularly the Islamic beliefs about the end times, comes from the hadith literature. As mentioned above, a hadith is a record of the sayings and deeds of Muhammad. According to Muslim scholars, during the lifetime of Muhammad and after he died, his followers began to orally relay their memories of all of the things that Muhammad said or did. The isnad and the matan. Each hadith consists of two parts, the isnad and the matan. At the beginning of any hadith is the isnad, or the chain of transmission. The isnad is essentially the he said, she said, he said chain of people who relay a memory of something Muhammad said or did. In English an isnad might read like, John said he overheard Mary say that Muhammad used to say such and such. To complicate this further for those unfamiliar with Islamic literature, of course, all the names are in Arabic. Many of the names are therefore long and possibly compounded. So here is a real example of an isnad from a hadith taken from Malik S. Muwatta. Yahya related to me from Malik from Amr ibn Yahya al-Mazini from Abu al-Habab said ibn Yasar that Abdullah ibn Umar said. Sometimes there will be, however, only one name listed in the isnad, which is usually an indicator that the person relating the hadith was a direct companion or family member of Muhammad. An example might be: Aisha related that Muhammad, peace be upon him, said. The other part of the hadith is the actual text. It is the portion that records the sayings or deeds of Muhammad. This part of the hadith is called the matan. So every hadith is composed of the isnad, chain of transmitters, and the matan, the sayings or actions of Muhammad. Throughout this book, in order to simplify things, we will generally quote the matan only. The isnad will be included with the references in the endnotes. Chapter 3. Islamic Eschatology. Most books on Islamic eschatology primarily consist of the author's best attempts to gather, compile, and relay the most reliable hadith and various traditions relating to the end times. Beyond this, of course, most Islamic eschatology books also contain commentary from the author as well. Because I am not a hadith scholar, nor do I aspire to ever become one, and because I do not want to merely present my own interpretation of what Islam teaches regarding the end times, I have strictly utilized either Islamic traditions or commentary from those Islamic scholars and authors who have already written extensively on these subjects. As such, much of this book will be heavy with such quotations and references. The majority of Islamic studies of eschatology are divided into two categories: the minor signs and the major signs. The minor signs are sometimes thought of as the equivalent of what Jesus referred to as the birth pangs, which is to say that they are those signs that precede the major signs. To a degree this is true. The difference, however, is that many of the minor signs actually take place concurrently with the major signs. Thus the minor signs should not necessarily be thought of as the first signs, but rather the lesser signs. Some of the minor signs are quite interesting, but for the purpose of this study we will not delve into them. Instead we will move directly into the major signs. The major signs crucial to this study is a clear understanding of just what Islam teaches regarding the major signs. The major signs, or the greater signs, obviously speak of far more significant events than the minor signs. These signs relate to issues such as the coming of the Muslim Antichrist, Ad-Dajjal, or the return of the Muslim Jesus, Isa al-Masih, or most importantly, the coming of the Muslim Savior/Messiah figure, al-Mahdi. They do not relate to, for instance, the increase in immorality, or religious ignorance, or other such general signs. While some of the minor signs are both fairly vague and debatable as to their legitimacy, the major signs are absolutely a non-negotiable entity to the Muslim mind. In order to understand the importance of the major signs to Muslims, one must first understand the importance of end-time belief among Muslims. Priority of the last days in Islamic belief. The Quran mentions 5 things that a Muslim must believe in order to be a Muslim. These 5 things have, as a result, become a creed of sorts within Islam. From the Quran we read, "It is not righteousness that ye turn your faces to the east and the west, but righteous is he who believeth in Allah and the last day and the angels and the scripture and the prophets." Surah 2:177, Pickthall. Notice the order of the 5 tenets of belief. 1. Belief in Allah. 2. Belief in the last day. 3. Belief in angels. 4. Belief in the scripture. 5. Belief in the prophets. This is much different than with Christianity. Unfortunately, while end-time belief plays a prominent role in the New Testament and in the life of the early church, today belief in the last days has become essentially optional or generally ignored by most. But not so with Islam. There are no true Muslims who do not believe in the last day and the events which precede it. Understanding the Islamic perspective regarding the last days and specifically the major signs therefore is crucial if we wish to understand the central religious anticipations of the 1.3 billion Muslims worldwide. It is to these core beliefs that we now turn. Chapter 4: The Mahdi, Islam's awaited Messiah. Among the major signs, the most anticipated and central sign that Muslims are awaiting is the coming of a man known as the Mahdi. In Arabic, al-Mahdi means the guided one. He is also sometimes referred to by Shia Muslims as Sahib al-Zaman or al-Mahdi al-Muntadhar, which translated mean the Lord of the Age and the guided/awaited one. The Mahdi is the first of the major signs. This is confirmed by Ibn Kathir, the renowned Muslim scholar from the 8th century. After the lesser signs of the hour appear and increase, mankind will have reached a stage of great suffering. Then the awaited Mahdi will appear. He is the first of the greater clear signs of the hour. The coming of the Mahdi is the central crowning element of all Islamic end-time narratives. So central to Islamic eschatological expectations is the coming of the Mahdi, that some Muslim scholars do not even refer to the minor signs as such, but instead, refer to them as the signs accompanying the Mahdi. While there are some variations of belief between the Sunni and Shia sects of Islam, and while certain quarters of Sunnis reject him altogether, general belief in the Mahdi is not a sectarian issue within Islam, but is universal among most Muslims. According to Sheikh Muhammad Hisham Kabani, chairman of the Islamic Supreme Council of America, the coming of the Mahdi is established doctrine for both Sunni and Shia Muslims, and indeed for all humanity. Ayatollah Bakir al-Sadr and Ayatollah Murtada Mutahari, both Shia Muslim scholars, in their book, The Awaited Savior, describe the Mahdi this way: a figure more legendary than that of the Mahdi, the awaited Savior, has not been seen in the history of mankind. The threads of the world events have woven many a fine design in human life, but the pattern of the Mahdi stands high above every other pattern. He has been the vision of the visionaries in history. He has been the dream of all the dreamers of the world. For the ultimate salvation of mankind, he is the pole star of hope on which the gaze of humanity is fixed. In this quest for the truth about the Mahdi there is no distinction of any caste, creed, or country. The quest is universal, exactly in the same way as the Mahdi himself is universal. He stands resplendent high above the narrow walls in which humanity is cut up and divided. He belongs to everybody. For all that and much more, what exactly is the Mahdi? Surely that is the big question which the thinking people all over the world would like to ask. Indeed, just who is this awaited one that the Islamic world is longing for, and what is it that he does that has them all in such a state of anticipation? This chapter will attempt to thoroughly answer this question, primarily by citing various Islamic traditions and the interpretations of Muslim scholars that study them. I would like to encourage you to take the time to read each and every quote. It is in these references that we find an articulation of one of the central beliefs and passions of many of the 1.3 billion Muslims that we presently share the earth with. Those of us who desire a greater understanding of one of the primary underlying spiritual factors affecting the world today should pay very close attention. Islam's Messiah. In the simplest of terms, the Mahdi is Islam's Messiah, or Savior. While the actual terms Messiah and Messianism have very clearly Judeo-Christian roots, University of Virginia professor Abdulaziz Abdul Hussein Sachedina agrees that these terms are appropriately used in an Islamic context when referring to the Mahdi. In his scholarly work on the subject, Islamic Messianism, Sachedina elaborates thusly: the term Messianism in the Islamic context is frequently used to translate the important concept of an eschatological figure, the Mahdi, who as the foreordained leader will rise to launch a great social transformation in order to restore and adjust all things under divine guidance. The Islamic Messiah, thus, embodies the aspirations of his followers in the restoration of the purity of the faith, which will bring true and uncorrupted guidance to all mankind, creating a just social order and a world free from oppression in which the Islamic revelation will be the norm for all nations. Thus it is fair to say that the rising of the Mahdi is to the majority of Muslims what the return of Jesus is to Christians. While Christians await the return of Jesus the Messiah to fulfill all of God's prophetic promises to the people of God, Muslims await the appearance of the Mahdi, to fulfill these purposes. Sheikh Kabani likewise identifies the Mahdi as Islam's primary Messiah figure. Jews are waiting for the Messiah, Christians are waiting for Jesus, and Muslims are waiting for both the Mahdi and Jesus. All religions describe them as men coming to save the world. A man from the family of Muhammad. The first and most often cited Islamic belief with regard to the Mahdi is the tradition which states that the Mahdi will descend from the family of Muhammad and will bear Muhammad's name. The world will not come to pass until a man from among my family, whose name will be my name, rules over the Arabs. The Prophet said, the Mahdi will be of my family, of the descendants of Fatima, Muhammad's daughter. A universal leader for all Muslims throughout the Islamic world today. There is a call for the restoration of the Islamic Caliphate. The Caliph, Khalifa, in Islam may be viewed somewhat as the Pope of the Muslims. The Caliph is viewed as the vice-regent for Allah on the earth. It is important to understand that when Muslims call for the restoration of the Caliphate, it is ultimately the Mahdi that they are calling for. For the Mahdi is the awaited final Caliph of Islam. As such, Muslims everywhere will be obligated to follow the Mahdi. If you see him, go and give him your allegiance, even if you have to crawl over ice, because he is the vice-regent, Khalifa, of Allah, the Mahdi. He will pave the way for and establish the government of the family or community of Muhammad. Every believer will be obligated to support him. The ruler of the world. The Mahdi is believed to be a future Muslim world leader who will not only rule over the Islamic world, but also the non-Muslim world as well. The Mahdi is said to lead a world revolution that will establish a new Islamic world order throughout the entire earth. He will reappear on the appointed day, and then he will fight against the forces of evil, lead a world revolution and set up a new world order based on justice, righteousness, and virtue. Ultimately the righteous will take the world administration in their hands and Islam will be victorious over all the religions. He is the precursor of the victory of the truth and the fall of all tyrants. He heralds the end of injustice and oppression and the beginning of the final rising of the Sun of Islam, which will never again set and which will ensure happiness and the elevation of mankind. The Mahdi is one of Allah's clear signs which will soon be made evident to everyone. The Mahdi's means and method of accomplishing this world revolution will include multiple military campaigns or holy wars, jihad. While some Muslims believe that most of the non-Muslims of the world will convert to Islam peaceably during the reign of the Mahdi, most traditions picture the non-Muslim world coming to Islam as a result of being conquered by the Mahdi. Abdul Rahman Kalani, author of The Last Apocalypse, describes the many battles of the Mahdi. Al-Mahdi will receive a pledge of allegiance as a caliph for Muslims. He will lead Muslims in many battles of jihad. His reign will be a caliphate that follows the guidance of the Prophet. Many battles will ensue between Muslims and the disbelievers during the Mahdi's reign. Even Harun Yahya, a moderate and very popular Muslim author, refers to the Mahdi's invasion of numerous non-Muslim lands. The Mahdi will invade all the places between East and West. The army of black flags. The Mahdi's ascendancy to power is said to be preceded by an army from the east who will be carrying black flags or banners of war. Sheikh Kabani states, Hadith indicate that black flags coming from the area of Khorasan will signify the appearance of the Mahdi is nigh. Khorasan is in today's Iran, and some scholars have said that this hadith means when the black flags appear from Central Asia, i.e. in the direction of Khorasan, then the appearance of the Mahdi is imminent. Another tradition states that, the Messenger of Allah said, the black banners will come from the east and their hearts will be as firm as iron. Whoever hears of them should join them and give allegiance, even if it means crawling across snow. In Islam there are two flags. One is white and one is black. Written across both flags in Arabic are the words, there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. The white flag is called al-Liwa and serves as the sign for the leader of the Muslim army and is the flag of the Islamic State. The black flag is called ar-Raya and is used by the Muslim army. It is also called the flag of jihad, and is carried into battle. One flag is governmental and the other is a military flag. When Muhammad returned to his home city of Mecca after being exiled for 8 years, he returned as a conqueror. With him were 10,000 Muslim soldiers. They carried with them black flags. On the flags was one word written in Arabic: punishment. I was once talking to a group of young Muslim men and asking them some questions. I asked them if the obvious superior militaries of America and Israel compared to the militaries of any Islamic nations were a source of difficulty for many Muslims. One of these men then became very angry at my question and snapped out, "You Americans and Zionists better get ready, because the black flags are coming." At the time, I had no idea what he was talking about. Later I learned the meaning. The conquering of Israel. Islamic tradition pictures the Mahdi as joining with the army of Muslim warriors carrying black flags. The Mahdi will then lead this army to Israel and reconquer it for Islam. The Jews will be slaughtered until very few remain, and Jerusalem will become the location of the Mahdi's rule over the earth. Rasulullah Muhammad said, "Armies carrying black flags will come from Khorasan. No power will be able to stop them, and they will finally reach Elah, Beit al-Maqdis in Jerusalem, where they will erect their flags." It is important to note here the reference above to Beit al-Maqdis. In Arabic this means the Holy House. This is referring to the Dome of the Rock Mosque and is located on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. In a particularly venomous manner, Egyptian authors, Muhammad ibn Izzat and Mohammed Arif, comment on the above tradition. The Mahdi will be victorious and eradicate those pigs and dogs and the idols of this time, so that there will once more be a caliphate based on prophethood, as the hadith states. Jerusalem will be the location of the rightly guided caliphate and the center of Islamic rule, which will be headed by Imam al-Mahdi. That will abolish the leadership of the Jews, and put an end to the domination of the Satans who spit evil into people and cause corruption in the earth, making them slaves of false idols and ruling the world by laws other than the Sharia Islamic law of the Lord of the worlds. Emphasis mine, there is a very famous tradition that is often quoted throughout the Islamic world that speaks of the Mahdi's Melita would not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews, and the Muslims would kill them until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and a stone or a tree would say, "Muslim, or the servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him." Emphasis mine, the miraculous provider who will be loved by all. It is said that the Mahdi will have control over the wind and the rain and the crops. Under the Mahdi's rule, the world will live in prosperity. Islamic tradition relates that Muhammad once said, "In the last days of my Ummah, universal Islamic community, the Mahdi will appear. Allah will give him power over the wind and the rain, and the earth will bring forth its foliage. He will give away wealth profusely, flocks will be in abundance, and the Ummah will be large and honored. In those years my community will enjoy a time of happiness such as they have never experienced before. Heaven will send rain upon them in torrents, the earth will not withhold any of its plants, and wealth will be available to all. A man will stand and say, 'Give to me, Mahdi,' and he will say, 'Take.' As a result of the numerous benefits that the Mahdi brings, it is said that all the inhabitants of the earth will be possessed with a deep love of him. Allah will sow love of him in the hearts of all people. Al-Mahdi appears, everyone only talks about him, drinks the love of him, and never talks about anything other than him." The timing of the Mahdi's reign. While there is more than one tradition regarding the nature and timing of the Mahdi's ascendancy to power, there is one particular hadith that places this event at the time of a final peace agreement between the Arabs and the Romans. Romans should be interpreted as referring to Christians, or more generally, the West. Although this peace agreement is made with the Romans, it is said to be mediated specifically through a Jew from the priestly lineage of Aaron. The peace agreement will be made for a period of 7 years. Rasulullah Muhammad said, "There will be 4 peace agreements between you and the Romans Christians. The 4th agreement will be mediated through a person who will be from the progeny of Hadrat Harun, Honorable Aaron, Moses' brother, and will be upheld for 7 years. It appears that the period of this 7-year peace agreement will likewise be the period of the Mahdi's reign. While there are a few traditions that specify that the Mahdi will reign on the earth for as much as 8 or possibly even 9 years, most traditions state that the time of his reign will be 7 years. The prophet said, "He will divide the property, and will govern the people by the sunnah of their prophet and establish Islam on earth. He will remain 7 years, then die, and the Muslims will pray over him." The prophet said, "The Mahdi will fill the earth with equity and justice as it was filled with oppression and tyranny, and he will rule for 7 years. Al-Mahdi, the rider on a white horse. The Mahdi is believed to ride on a white horse. Whether or not this is symbolic or literal is hard to say. Quite interestingly, this tradition is based on the Muslim interpretation of Christian scriptures. Despite the fact that Muslims view the Bible as having been changed and corrupted by Jews and Christians, they still claim to believe that some portions of the original inspired books are still to be found within the corrupted Bible. As such, there exists a tradition within Islamic scholarship that seeks to extract those portions of the Bible that Muslims feel may be untainted by the corrupting influence of Jews and Christians. These Judeo-Christian traditions are called by Muslims, Israeliyat. One such transmitter of biblical traditions is Muslim scholar Kabi al-Abar. He is viewed among Muslims as a trustworthy transmitter of hadith as well as Israeliyat. Kabi al-Abar is supported in his view that this description of the rider on the white horse as found in the Book of Revelation is indeed the Mahdi by two well-known Egyptian authors, Muhammad ibn Izzat and Muhammad Arif in their book Al-Mahdi and the End of Time. Izzat and Arif quote Kabi al-Abar as saying, "I find the Mahdi recorded in the books of the prophets." For instance, the Book of Revelation says, "And I saw and behold a white horse. He that sat on him, went forth conquering and to conquer." Izzat and Arif then go on to say, "It is clear that this man is the Mahdi who will ride the white horse and judge by the Quran, with justice, and with whom will be men with marks of prostration on their foreheads, marks on their foreheads from bowing in prayer with their head to the ground 5 times daily." It is said by some that it was for this reason that Saddam Hussein had numerous murals painted all over Baghdad portraying himself as a Muslim knight on a white horse with sword drawn doing valiant battle against the infidels. Al-Mahdi the miraculous archaeologist. In one final very interesting series of traditions regarding the Mahdi, we find that he is said to produce some previously undiscovered Bible scrolls and even the Ark of the Covenant. Kabi al-Abar says, "He will be called Mahdi because he will guide, Yadi, to something hidden and will bring out the Torah and Gospel from a town called Antioch." As-Suyuti mentioned in Al-Hawi that the Messenger of Allah, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, said, "He is called the Mahdi because he will guide the people to a mountain in Syria from which he will bring out the volumes of the Torah to refute the Jews. At the hands of the Mahdi the Ark of the Covenant will be brought forth from the lake of Tiberias and taken and placed in Jerusalem." Ad-Dani said that he is called the Mahdi because he will be guided to a mountain in Syria from which he will bring forth the volumes of the Torah with which to argue against the Jews, and at his hands a group of them will become Muslim. Apparently, the purpose of finding these lost portions of the Old and New Testaments as well as the Ark of the Covenant is to help the Mahdi win converts from both Christianity and Judaism prior to eradicating the remainder who do not convert to Islam. We will discuss this aspect of Islamic tradition further in later chapters. Summary. After reviewing the various Islamic traditions and opinions of the Muslim scholars, let us now review and walk through a list of what we have learned about the person and the mission of the Mahdi as he exists in the minds of many of the 1.3 billion Muslims worldwide. 1. The Mahdi is Islam's primary messiah figure. 2. He will be a descendant of Muhammad and will bear Muhammad's name, Muhammad bin Abdullah. 3. He will be a very devout Muslim. 4. He will be an unparalleled spiritual, political, and military world leader. 5. He will emerge after a period of great turmoil and suffering upon the earth. 6. He will establish justice and righteousness throughout the world and eradicate tyranny and oppression. 7. He will be the Caliph and Imam, Vice-Regent and leader, of Muslims worldwide. 8. He will lead a world revolution and establish a new world order. 9. He will lead military action against all those who oppose him. 10. He will invade many countries. 11. He will make a 7-year peace treaty with a Jew of priestly lineage. 12. He will conquer Israel for Islam and lead the faithful Muslims in a final slaughter/battle against Jews. 13. He will establish the new Islamic world headquarters from Jerusalem. 14. He will rule for 7 years, possibly as much as 8 or 9. 15. He will cause Islam to be the only religion practiced on the earth. 16. He will appear riding a white horse, possibly symbolic. 17. He will discover some previously undiscovered biblical manuscripts that he will use to argue with the Jews and cause some Jews to convert to Islam. 18. He will also rediscover the Ark of the Covenant from the Sea of Galilee, which he will bring to Jerusalem. 19. He will have supernatural power from Allah over the wind and the rain and crops. 20. He will possess and distribute enormous amounts of wealth. 21. He will be loved by all the people of the earth. Chapter 5. Comparing the biblical Antichrist and the Mahdi. The Antichrist. Most people who haven't even read the Bible have heard of the man known popularly as the Antichrist. Simply put, according to the Bible, the Antichrist will be Satan's primary human agent on the earth in the last days. Interestingly, in the Bible, the Antichrist is actually only referred to once by that specific name, 1 John 2:18. Using other names, however, there are numerous references to the Antichrist found throughout the Bible. Some of the various names that Scripture assigns to the Antichrist are the beast, Revelation 13:4, the abomination that causes desolation, Matthew 24:15, the desolator, Daniel 9:27, the man of sin, the man of lawlessness, the son of destruction, 2 Thessalonians 2, the little horn, Daniel 7:8, the Assyrian, Micah 5:5, Isaiah 10:5, 14:25, the oppressor, the king of Babylon, Isaiah 14, and even the mysterious Gog, Ezekiel 38:1, Revelation 20:7. There are several other names that Scripture uses to refer to the Antichrist as well. But beyond all of his unusual names, who exactly is the Antichrist? In this chapter we will review a few of the primary descriptions and actions that define just who the Antichrist is according to the Bible. Our examination will also focus on several very specific similarities between the Antichrist and the Mahdi. A powerful political and military world leader. From the Bible, we learn that in the last days, the Antichrist will emerge as a man who will lead a very powerful world empire the likes of which history has yet to produce. This powerful leadership role of the Antichrist is first described clearly in the Bible by the prophet Daniel. In the book of Daniel, in the 7th chapter, we find Daniel describing a vision of 4 very bizarre and gruesome beasts. After describing the first 3 beasts, Daniel says this of the 4th. After that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth, it crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Daniel 7:7-8. Then, in verses 15 to 16, Daniel asks an angel in his vision to explain the interpretation of the vision of the 4 beasts. The angel explains that the 4 beasts represent 4 very great kingdoms or empires. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the true meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The 4 great beasts are 4 kingdoms that will rise from the earth. Daniel 7:15-17. It's actually pretty straightforward. Daniel again asks the angel specifically about the 4th beast, and in particular about the little horn that uprooted 3 horns. The angel again responds with a very direct and clear explanation. He gave me this explanation: the fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. Daniel 7:23-24. Essentially, the angel explains that the fourth kingdom will be an empire that will cause great destruction to the whole earth. Initially, this kingdom will consist of 10 kings. Then another king, an 11th, will arise and will displace 3 of the previous kings. This 11th king is the Antichrist, first referred to as the little horn. Thus we see that based on the vision that Daniel was given, the Antichrist is a future king who will first gain control over 3 other kingdoms or nations, and eventually over 10, thus forming his future 10-nation beast empire. It will be an empire of unparalleled power and ferocity, which will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. In the last part of Daniel, chapter 7, the angel describes to Daniel the actions of this king as well as his end. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times and half a time. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Daniel 7:25-27. The king is said to oppress the saints of God for a period of time that most Bible scholars agree is 3.5 years, a time, times and half a time. But eventually his dominion will be taken away, and replaced by the kingdom of the Most High God. 300 years later, in the book of Revelation, the Apostle John likewise describes the Antichrist and his beast empire in very similar terms. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. Men worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God, and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. Revelation 13:2-4-8. While the symbolic language here is fairly thick, if we understand the biblical usage of particular symbolic terms, then the picture is actually quite clear. The beast, again, refers to the Antichrist, who is a king over a 10-nation empire. The horns represent authority and power. 10 horns speak of both an extremely high degree of authority as well as the number of nations and their kings that will unite to form the beast's kingdom. The dragon who gives the beast his authority is Satan. Satan is often spoken of in the Bible as a dragon or a serpent. The global impact of this beast-like empire is made clear by the phrase, "And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation." We see the specific question that the people of the earth ask is, who is like the beast? Who can make war against him? It appears to those on the earth that the beast is absolutely beyond challenge. And again, we see the same specific period of time that was given to the beast to persecute the God's people as 42 months. 42 months is 3.5 years. This same time frame was given in the previously cited passage of Daniel 7:25. Thus, we have seen that the Bible prophesies that the Antichrist will be a political and military leader whose power will be unparalleled by any other world leader throughout history. The Mahdi as world ruler. As we have seen from the Islamic traditions and Muslim scholars, the Mahdi, like the Antichrist, is also prophesied to be a political and military world leader unparalleled by any other throughout world history. The Mahdi is said to fight against the forces of evil, lead a world revolution and set up a new world order based on justice, righteousness, and virtue. At this time, according to Islamic tradition, the Mahdi is said to preside over the entire earth as the final caliph of Islam. And of course, as we saw in the last chapter, the Muslims will take the world administration in their hands and Islam will be victorious over all the religions. Without question, Islam views the Mahdi as one whose rule will extend over all of the earth. Clearly then, we see that the Antichrist and the Mahdi are both described as being political and military leaders, the likes of which the world has never before seen. While many powerful leaders have arisen throughout world history, the descriptions given concerning both the Antichrist and the Mahdi surpass any that have yet arisen. But the Mahdi and the Antichrist are both described as being more than merely political and military leaders. They are both viewed as being supreme religious leaders as well. The Antichrist as a spiritual world leader. The Bible establishes the fact that the Antichrist will be a spiritual leader whose authority will be acknowledged worldwide. After examining the Antichrist's role as a universal religious leader, many Bible prophecy teachers have talked about the coming of the one world religion or the false church, which the Antichrist will both create and enforce upon the entire earth. This concept of a coming dominant and demonically inspired world religion is partly arrived at due to the frequent references to worship that are associated with the Antichrist throughout Scripture. In the book of Revelation we read that the Antichrist will both inspire and demand worship. This worship will be directed at both Satan, who is referred to as the dragon, and the Antichrist, who is referred to as the beast. Men worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?" All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. Revelation 13:4-8. Beyond the fact that the Antichrist establishes a worldwide worship movement, another reason to see him as a spiritual world leader is because the Bible says he will be assisted by a man whom it refers to as the false prophet. Of course, the very title, false prophet, assumes the religious nature of this man. One of the primary roles of the false prophet is to specifically perform deceptive signs and wonders that will help persuade the inhabitants of the earth to worship the Antichrist/beast, but the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who had performed the miraculous signs on his behalf. Revelation 19:20. It is clear then, the Bible teaches that the Antichrist will be the leader of a worldwide religious worship movement that will attempt to displace and usurp worship from the God of the Bible. This worship will then be directed toward both himself and to Satan, the invisible spirit, the provocateur and puppet master that motivates, empowers, and gives authority to the Antichrist to accomplish his worldwide task. The Mahdi as a spiritual world leader. Likewise, it almost goes without saying, the Mahdi of Islam will also be the leader of a worldwide worship movement. It will be a worship movement that will seek to cause anyone who practices any religion other than Islam to renounce their faith and worship Allah, the God of Islam. As we saw in the last chapter, the Mahdi will govern the people by the Sunnah of their Prophet and establish Islam on earth. And Islam will be victorious over all the religions. Thus we see that the Mahdi is the leader of a world revolution that will institute a new world order that will be based on the religion of Islam. Islam will be the only religion that will be allowed to be practiced. Both the Antichrist and the Mahdi are said to be the unqualified leaders of a global religious movement that will draw worship away from the God of the Bible and his Son Jesus Christ. As we will see clearly in later chapters, inherent in the worship of Allah within the context of Islam is a direct denial of the God of the Bible and his Son Jesus Christ. In fact, this is the reason that some Muslims feel so strongly as to say that the Mahdi will eradicate those pigs and dogs, the Christians and the Jews who refuse to convert to Islam. Which leads us to the next obvious similarity between the Antichrist and the Mahdi. The Antichrist's targeted campaign against Jews and Christians. The Bible is very clear that Satan, through the Antichrist, will specifically target first Jews, and then Christians for death. In the book of Revelation, chapter 12 and 13, we read another prophetic passage of scripture that is rich with symbolic language. Initially it is slightly difficult to understand, but after the symbols are explained, it becomes very clear. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. Revelation 12:1. The woman symbolically pictured here is the family or nation of Israel, the Jewish people. We see that she is crowned with 12 stars. This represents the 12 sons of Israel who became the 12 tribes that make up the family or the nation of Israel, Genesis 35:23-26. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. Revelation 12:2-5. The woman, Israel, becomes pregnant and gives birth to a man-child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. This is a clear reference to Jesus the Jewish Messiah, see Psalm 2:9. The dragon mentioned here is identified in verse 9 as, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. We see that Satan desires to kill Jesus, but instead Jesus is snatched up to God and to his throne. This is a reference to Jesus' ascension to heaven after the resurrection, Acts 1:8. After this, the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. He, the dragon, pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Revelation 12:1-6,9,13,14,17. We see that Satan is enraged at the woman, Israel, and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Israel's other offspring are those Christians who indeed obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. This is the only passage that makes specific reference to Satan making a direct target of both Jews and Christians together. And we know that this passage is speaking specifically of the end times, because it mentions twice the 3.5-year period, 1260 days and a time, times and half a time, that the Antichrist will have authority to war against the saints. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God, and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Revelation 13:5-7. The prophet Daniel also saw that the Antichrist would have this authority to wage a successful war against the saints. Saints is also translated as holy ones in some translations. It speaks primarily of the true followers of Jesus who know and serve the one true God. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times and half a time. Daniel 7:25. Again here we see the reference to the 3.5-year period that Antichrist will persecute those who resist him. The Bible is clear then, the Antichrist will specifically target those who resist his attempts to establish his religion all over the earth. From the book of Revelation as well as the prophet Daniel, we see that the 2 groups that Satan is most enraged against are the Jews and the Christians. The Mahdi's targeted campaign against Jews and Christians. Interestingly enough, Islamic tradition speaks much of the Mahdi's special calling to convert Christians and Jews to Islam, yet speaks very little specifically of conversions from other faiths. It seems as though converting Christians and Jews to Islam will be the primary evangelistic thrust of the Mahdi. The following quote from Ayatollah Ibrahim Khomeini clearly articulates this vision. The Mahdi will offer the religion of Islam to the Jews and Christians. If they accept it, they will be spared, otherwise they will be killed. And of course we cannot forget the infamous hadith that has become a favorite of many Muslim anti-Semites. Again, note that it is speaking specifically about the last hour. The last hour would not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews, and the Muslims would kill them until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and a stone or a tree would say, "Muslim, or the servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him," but the tree Garkad would not say, "For it is the tree of the Jews." 10. After commenting on this particular hadith, several Muslim authors will be quick to point out the very interesting fact that this particular tree, the Garkad, apparently the boxwood tree, is presently being planted in abundance by Jews in Israel. The point is that this final Holocaust is expected by Muslims to take place within the present state of Israel. This of course corresponds to another very specific similarity between the biblical Antichrist and the Mahdi. A military attack against Israel and the establishment of the Temple Mount as the seat of authority. The Bible teaches that the Antichrist, with his multi-nation coalition, will attack Israel, and specifically Jerusalem, to conquer it. "I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it, the city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. Half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people, who submit to Antichrist's rule, will not be taken from the city." Zechariah 14:2. Gog, Ezekiel's name for the Antichrist, will go up, you will come like a storm, you will be like a cloud covering the land, you and all your troops, and many peoples with you. Thus says the Lord God, it will come about on that day, that thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil plan, and you will say, "I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will go against those who are at rest, that live securely, all of them living without walls and having no bars or gates, to capture spoil and to seize plunder, to turn your hand against the waste places which are now inhabited, and against the people, Israelites, who are gathered from the nations, who have acquired cattle and goods, who live at the center of the world." Ezekiel 38:9-12 NASB. According to the Bible, after this attack, the Antichrist will specifically set up his throne in God's temple. The Apostle Paul lays this out quite clearly. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. 2 Thessalonians 2:4. The location of the Jewish temple has always been on Mt. Moriah in Jerusalem. Today, the temple that once stood on Mt. Moriah does not exist. It was destroyed by the Roman Emperor Titus in 70 AD according to the prophecy of Jesus. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. "Do you see all these things?" he asked. "I tell you the truth, not one stone here will be left on another, every one will be thrown down." Matthew 24:1-2. Today, Mt. Moriah, sometimes known as the Temple Mount or in Arabic as Haram Ash-Sharif, is the location of two mosques and is considered to be the third holiest site of Islam. There is endless speculation about the Temple Mount regarding issues such as exactly where the Jewish temple once was located on the mount, or whether or not there will be a Jewish temple rebuilt there in the future. Based on the above verse from the Apostle Paul, it certainly seems to indicate that there will indeed be a rebuilt Jewish temple in Jerusalem. The Apostle Paul says that the Antichrist will set himself up in God's temple, or more literally, he takes his seat in the temple of God. This speaks not so much of a literal sitting down as it does of a taking a position of authority. Thus we see that the Antichrist will make Mt. Moriah, and more specifically, the rebuilt Jewish temple, the specific location of his rule. Jesus warned of this event 2,000 years ago. Referring to the Antichrist having set himself up in the Jewish temple, and the events that will immediately follow, Jesus said, "So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive, but for the sake of the elect those days will be shortened." Matthew 24:16-22. Here we see Jesus referring to the Antichrist's occupancy of the temple as the abomination that causes desolation. The desolation is a reference to the chaos and severe persecution against the Jews and Christians that will immediately follow when the Antichrist's true identity is revealed. After his military campaign against Jerusalem, the Antichrist will make his base of authority the Temple Mount itself. At this time, it is clear that the Antichrist's malevolent feelings toward Israel will become fully manifest. So much so that Jesus warns the inhabitants of Jerusalem to straightway flee to the mountains. The Mahdi's attack of Jerusalem and the establishment of the Islamic Caliphate from Jerusalem. Likewise, the Mahdi is said to attack Jerusalem and reconquer it for Islam in order that the new Islamic rule over the earth will be established from Jerusalem. Armies carrying black flags will come from Khorasan, Iran. No power will be able to stop them, and they will finally reach Elah, Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, where they will erect their flags. 11. Jerusalem will be the location of the rightly guided caliphate and the center of Islamic rule, which will be headed by Imam al-Mahdi. 12. Also, as we just saw in the section above, the Mahdi will not end his campaign against Jerusalem in a peaceful way. For the Jews, the Islamic version of the last days ends with the last few surviving Jews hiding behind rocks or trees from the sword of Islam. The military campaign against Jerusalem and the establishment of the Islamic Caliphate there likewise will not result in a benevolent rule over the Jews by the Mahdi, for as we have already seen, the last quote above continues, that will abolish the leadership of the Jews, and put an end to the domination of the Satans who spit evil into people and cause corruption in the earth. 13. In relation to the above attack against the inhabitants of Israel, there is quite interestingly, another very specific correlation between the actions of the Mahdi and the actions of the biblical Antichrist. While the similarities between the Antichrist and the Mahdi that we have already discussed are quite astonishing, I believe that the specificity of this next parallel is just simply incredible. The Antichrist's 7-year treaty with Israel. After rising to power, and as a prelude to his invasion of Israel, the Antichrist is said to initiate a treaty with the nation of Israel for 7 years. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. In the middle of the 7 he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on a wing of the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Daniel 9:27. In context, this verse shows us that the Antichrist will establish a covenant with Israel for 7 years. The specific Hebrew word used in this verse that is translated merely as 7 is Shavuot. It literally means a week, but can mean either a week of days or years. In Hebrew thought, a 7-year period is similar to our decade. We in the West tend to measure years through a decimal system based of increments of tens, while we measure days in terms of 7, a week. The Hebrews measured both days and years in increments of 7. The word translated as 7 in Daniel 9:27 is referring to 7 years. This is the specific amount of time that the Antichrist will set for his peace treaty with Israel. Then, in the middle of the 7 years, the Antichrist will renege on his treaty and stop the offerings and sacrifices in the Jewish temple, and then he will proclaim himself to be not only the ruler of the world, but also God himself. Isaiah the prophet makes mention of this covenant and rebukes Israel for making it. He actually refers to it as a covenant with death, Isaiah 28, 14-15. In this covenant, the Israelis find a false sense of security. The Mahdi's 7-year treaty. Again, similarly the Mahdi is said to be one who will initiate Islam's fourth and final treaty between the Romans and the Muslims. Again, Romans should be interpreted as Christians or the West in general. The executioners of Nicholasburg in their pre-execution statement addressed President Bush as, "You, O dog of the Romans." Interestingly enough, this fourth treaty is said to be made with a descendant of Moses' brother Aaron the priest. Such a descendant would be a Kohanim. That is to say, he would be a priest. Only Kohanim are allowed among Jews to officiate the priestly duties of the temple. This is important in light of the fact that many Christian prophecy teachers and theologians have speculated that the treaty that the Antichrist will initiate with Israel will include an agreement to allow the Jews to rebuild their temple. But probably the most amazing aspect of this treaty that the Mahdi makes with this Jew of priestly lineage is its time frame. The specific time frame given for the treaty is exactly the same as the Antichrist's peace treaty, 7 years. Citing Hadith which speak of the Mahdi's emergence and rule, Muhammad Ali ibn Zubair relates this amazing tradition. The Prophet said, "There will be 4 peace agreements between you and the Romans. The 4th will be mediated through a person who will be from the progeny of Hadrat Aaron, Honorable Aaron, the brother of Moses, and will be upheld for 7 years." The people asked, "O Prophet Muhammad, who will be the Imam, leader, of the people at that time?" The Prophet said, "He will be from my progeny and will be exactly 40 years of age. His face will shine like a star." 14. Changing the laws and the times. Another of the Antichrist's goals according to the book of Daniel is said to be that he will try to change the set times and the laws. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints and try to change the set times and the laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times and half a time. Daniel 7:25. This is actually quite a big hint into the person of the Antichrist. For by his actions, we see a hint of his origin. It is said that he will desire to change 2 things, times and laws. Now we have already seen that the Mahdi will change the law by instituting the Islamic Sharia law all over the earth, but we have not seen any evidence in Islamic apocalyptic literature of him changing the times. The simple question, however, is, who else other than a Muslim would desire to change the times and laws? Besides the Gregorian calendar used by the West, there is also a Jewish, a Hindu and a Muslim calendar among others. Jews or Hindus, however, are not a people who would desire to impose their religious laws or calendars onto the rest of the world. Islam, however, does have both its own laws and its own calendar, both of which it would desire to impose onto the entire world. The Islamic calendar is based on the career of Muhammad. It begins at the migration, Hijrah, of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina. The Muslim calendar is viewed as being mandatory for all to observe. Dr. Walid Mahana articulates the Islamic position regarding the Islamic Hijrah calendar. It is considered a divine command to use a Hijrah calendar with 12 purely lunar months without intercalation, as evident from the Holy Quran. 15. Not only does Islam view as a divine imperative the use of a unique religious calendar, it also has its own week. Unlike the Western rhythm of a week, Monday through Friday being the body of the work week followed by Saturday and Sunday as the weekend, with Judaism and Christianity using these 2 days for their respective days of worship, Islam holds Friday as its sacred day of prayer. This is the day that Muslims meet at the mosque to pray and listen to a sermon. Thus it quite plausible that the biblical reference to the Antichrist who will try to change the set times and the laws is a Muslim. As we look at the full picture, only Islam fits the bill of a system that has its own unique calendar and week based on its own religious history and a clear system of law that it wishes to impose onto the entire earth. Surely if a Muslim ever emerges who is as powerful as the Mahdi is described as being, then he will certainly attempt to institute both the Islamic law worldwide, and the Islamic calendar and week as well. The rider on a white horse. The final similarity between the Antichrist and the Mahdi that we will discuss in this chapter is the fact that both the Antichrist and the Mahdi are identified with a biblical passage that describes a rider on a white horse. While this could be literal, it is most probably a symbolic picture of the two men. The amazing thing is that the origin of the biblical tradition of the Antichrist on a white horse and the origin of the Islamic tradition of the Mahdi on a white horse are both attributed to the same passage in the Bible. The basis for the symbolic picture of both the Antichrist and the Mahdi on a white horse is the 6th chapter of the book of Revelation. Here the Apostle John is describing his vision of the release of the events that mark the beginning of the end times. The picture is of Jesus holding a scroll. On the outside of the scroll are 7 wax seals. As each seal is broken, a specific and distinct end-time event is released. I watched as the Lamb, Jesus, opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. Revelation 6:1-2. The seals that follow this rider are: 1. Peace is taken from the earth. 2. Famine. 3. Plagues and death. 4. Persecution and martyrdom of God's people. 5. A great earthquake. 6. The wrath of God. So we see that after the rider appears on the scene, the world essentially free falls into the chaos that defines the last hour. The interpretation that many Bible scholars apply to this passage is thus. The rider is given a white horse, which is an attempt to be an imitation of the white horse that Jesus is said to ride when he returns, Revelation 19:11. Thus the rider is an imitation Christ, an impostor, an Antichrist. The bow, without any arrows, that the rider carries is a false peace. The rider is pictured as one who emerges carrying with his rise to power a false promise of peace. This is in alignment with and may be a direct reference to the false peace treaty that Antichrist makes with Israel at the start of the 7-year period of his rule. The crown on his head is obviously a reference to the position of authority and leadership that will be given to him. And we see that the true motivation and bent of the rider is to conquer. In light of the identity and activity of the rider then, we are not surprised to find out that the events that follow his emergence onto the world scene are not in keeping with an age of peace, but rather an age of apocalyptic chaos. Apparently this is not a problem for the Islamic scholars who generally adopt a very arbitrary pick-and-choose approach to the Bible. For in seeing the Antichrist on the white horse with a crown and conquering, Muslim scholars see a clear picture of the Mahdi. As mentioned in the earlier chapter on the Mahdi, the early Muslim transmitter of Hadith, Ka'b al-Abar is quoted as saying, "I find the Mahdi recorded in the books of the prophets. For instance, the book of Revelation says, 'And I saw and behold a white horse. He that sat on him, went forth conquering and to conquer.' 16. So in conclusion, we see that several of the most unique and distinguishing aspects of the biblical Antichrist's person, mission, and actions are matched to quite an amazing degree by the descriptions of the Mahdi as found in the Islamic traditions. And now, even further, we see that Muslim scholars actually apply Bible verses about the Antichrist to their awaited savior, the Mahdi. This must be seen as quite ironic, if not entirely prophetic. Chapter 6. The Muslim Jesus. After the emergence or the rising of the Mahdi, the second most important event among the major signs, is the return of Jesus Christ. Christians who love Jesus understandably get quite excited by the prospect that even Muslims are looking for and longing for his return. Unfortunately, the Islamic belief of just who this Jesus is that is coming, and what he does once he has arrived, is drastically different than what Christians believe about Jesus. The first thing that Christians need to understand regarding the Islamic belief about Jesus is that Muslims of course reject the idea that Jesus was or is the Son of God. According to Islam, Jesus is not, as the Bible articulates, God in the flesh. Secondly, in Islamic belief, Jesus never died on a cross for the sins of mankind. The Quran specifically denies that Jesus was ever crucified or that he ever experienced death. Muslims believe that after Allah miraculously delivered Jesus from death, he was assumed into heaven alive in a similar fashion to the biblical narrative regarding Elijah. Since then, Muslims believe, Jesus has remained with Allah and has been awaiting his opportunity to return to the earth to finish his ministry and complete his life. As such, to the Islamic mind, Jesus was not in any way a savior. To Muslims, Jesus was merely another prophet in the long line of prophets that Allah has sent to mankind. The special title of Messiah, although retained in the Islamic tradition, is essentially stripped of any truly biblically defined messianic characteristics. According to the sacred texts of Islam, as we are about to see, when Jesus returns, it most certainly will not be to restore the nation of Israel to the Jewish people. Nor will Jesus' purpose be to save and deliver his faithful followers from the ongoing persecution of the Antichrist. In order to understand the Islamic concept of Jesus' return, the first thing that needs to be realized is that when Jesus comes back, he comes back as a radical Muslim. This chapter will outline the Islamic traditions regarding the return of Jesus. Many of the hadith below that refer to Jesus do not call him by the name Jesus, but rather Isa. Muslims occasionally will refer to Jesus by his English name for our sake, but the name that the Quran gives him, and which most Muslims use, is Isa, or Isa, al-Masih, the Messiah. Other common titles that Islam uses when referring to Jesus are Hadrat Isa, Honorable Jesus, Isa bin Maryam, Jesus son of Mary, or Nabi Isa, Prophet Jesus. Some of these titles may be used below. The return of the Muslim Jesus. According to Islam's sacred traditions, Jesus' return is usually described as taking place just outside Damascus. At this very time Allah would send Christ, son of Mary, and he will descend at the white minaret in the eastern side of Damascus wearing 2 garments lightly dyed with saffron and placing his hands on the wings of 2 angels. When he would lower his head, there would fall beads of perspiration from his head, and when he would raise it up, beads like pearls would scatter from it. 1. The subordinate of the Mahdi. At this time, Jesus descends to meet the army of the Mahdi which will be preparing for battle. It will be just before the time of prayer. Muslims will still be preparing themselves for the battle, drawing up the ranks. Certainly, the time of prayer shall come and then Jesus, son of Mary, would descend. 2. Based on the relevant hadith, Islamic scholars seem to be in universal agreement that the Mahdi will ask Jesus to lead the prayers. Jesus will then refuse this request and will defer instead to the Mahdi to lead the prayer. The Messenger of Allah said, "A section of my people will not cease fighting for the truth and will prevail until the day of resurrection." He said, Jesus son of Mary would then descend and their Muslims commander the Mahdi would invite him to come and lead them in prayer, but he would say, "No, some amongst you are commanders over some." 3. The important element here that needs to be stressed is that Jesus will then pray behind the Mahdi as a direct statement regarding Jesus' inferiority of rank to the Mahdi. Jesus Christ will decline the offer and invitation of Imam Mahdi to come and lead the Muslims in prayer, and say his prayer behind Imam Mahdi. 4. Jesus, peace be upon him, will come and will perform the obligatory prayers behind the Mahdi and follow him. 5. Jesus will be following the Mahdi, the master of the time, and that is why he will be offering his prayers behind him. 6. Jesus the faithful Muslim. After Jesus returns, in keeping with his identity as a faithful Muslim, he will perform the ritual pilgrimage to Mecca called Hajj. The Prophet said, "Verily Isa ibn Maryam shall descend as an equitable judge and fair ruler. He shall tread his path on the way to Hajj, pilgrimage, and come to my grave to greet me, and I shall certainly answer him." 7. Jesus will institute Islamic law. While the Mahdi, as the Caliph, vice-regent, and Imam, leader, of the Muslims is clearly seen as being a superior to Jesus. Jesus is still said to be a leader of the Muslim community. According to the Islamic traditions, Jesus' primary purpose will be to oversee the institution and the enforcement of the Islamic Sharia law all over the world. Ibn Qayyim mentioned in Mana al-Munaf that the leader is the Mahdi who will request Jesus to lead the Muslims in prayer. Jesus will remain on the earth, not as a prophet, but as one of the community, Ummah, of Prophet Muhammad. Muslims will follow him as their leader. According to Shalabi, the Mahdi will lead the Muslims in prayer, and Jesus will rule the Muslims according to the divine law, Sharia. 8. Jesus, the son of Mary, will descend and will lead them, judging amongst them according to the Holy Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. 9. Jesus, the greatest Muslim evangelist. Islamic tradition teaches that because Jesus will declare himself to be a Muslim, he will lead many Christians to convert to Islam. Regarding those who do not convert to Islam, the Quran states that Jesus will be a witness against them on the Day of Judgment. There is not one of the people of the Scripture, Christians and Jews, but will believe in him before his death, and on the day of resurrection he will be a witness against them. Surah 4:159. Commenting on the above verse, Mufti Muhammad Shafi and Mufti Muhammad Rafi Usmani in their book, Signs of the Qiyamah, the Final Judgment and the Arrival of the Messiah, explain that the phrase "will believe in him before his death" means that Christians and Jews will confirm that he is alive and has not died, and he is not God or the Son of God, but merely his, Allah's, slave and messenger, and Isa, Jesus, will testify against those who had called him Son of God, the Christians, and those who had belied him, the Jews. 10. Sheikh Kabani, chairman of the Islamic Supreme Council of America, clearly articulates the Islamic perspective regarding Jesus' evangelistic role when he returns. Like all prophets, Prophet Jesus came with the divine message of surrender to God Almighty, which is Islam. This verse shows that when Jesus returns he will personally correct the misrepresentations and misinterpretations about himself. He will affirm the true message that he brought in his time as a prophet, and that he never claimed to be the Son of God. Furthermore, he will reaffirm in his second coming what he prophesied in his first coming, bearing witness to the seal of the messengers, Prophet Muhammad. In his second coming many non-Muslims will accept Jesus as a servant of Allah Almighty, as a Muslim and a member of the community of Muhammad. 11. Al-Sadra and Mutahari likewise articulate this same expectation. Jesus will descend from heaven and espouse the cause of the Mahdi. The Christians and the Jews will see him and recognize his true status. The Christians will abandon their faith in his Godhead. 12. Jesus will abolish Christianity. It is crucial to understand that according to Islamic tradition and belief, when Jesus returns, he does not merely come to convert most Christians to Islam but to literally abolish Christianity entirely. This fact is understood when we analyze a very well-known, and oft-quoted tradition that refers to 4 specific things that Jesus will do when he returns. Jesus is said to 1. Break crosses. 2. Kill all swine. 3. Abolish the jizya tax, a Muslim tax on non-Muslims. 4. Kill the Muslim Antichrist and his followers. The Prophet said, "There is no prophet between me and him, that is, Jesus. He will descend, to the earth. He will break the cross, kill swine, and abolish jizya. Allah will perish all religions except Islam." 13. The 3 actions of breaking the cross, killing pigs, and abolishing the jizya tax are based on the notion that Jesus will eliminate all other religions on the earth other than Islam. Shafi and Usmani explain that to break the cross means to abolish worship of the cross. Several Muslim friends that I've spoken with have expressed their understanding of this tradition. Jesus will break or remove all crosses from the rooftops and steeples of churches throughout the earth. This action will thus indicate that Jesus will be making a clear statement regarding his disapproval of the false notion that he was ever crucified on a cross. The killing of the swine is so that the Christian belief of its lawfulness is belied. 14. The reason for abolishing the jizya tax, the compulsory poll tax that non-Muslims must pay in order to live in a Muslim land, is based on the idea that when Jesus returns, the jizya tax will no longer be accepted. The only choice that Christians will have is to accept Islam or die. As Siddiq M.A. Valiant Code states in Doomsday Portents and Prophecies, Jesus, the Son of Mary, will soon descend among the Muslims as a just judge. Jesus will, therefore, judge according to the law of Islam. All people will be required to embrace Islam and there will be no other alternative. 15. Even Harun Yahya likewise affirms this belief in his book, Jesus Will Return, when he says, Jesus will remove all systems of disbelief in that period. 16. Muslim jurists also confirm these interpretations. Consider, for example, the ruling of Ahmad ibn Naqib al-Misri, d. 1368, from the Reliance of the Traveler, the classic Shafi manual of Islamic jurisprudence. The time and the place for the poll tax is before the final descent of Jesus, upon whom be peace. After his final coming, nothing but Islam will be accepted from them, for taking the poll tax is only effective until Jesus' descent, upon him and our Prophet be peace. 17. Jesus the Slayer of Jews. Beyond the accomplishment of abolishing Christianity on a worldwide scale, another of Jesus' primary jobs is to kill a figure known as the Dajjal, or the Muslim version of the Antichrist. But not only will Jesus kill the Dajjal, but also all of the Dajjal's followers, who consequently, will mostly be Jews. Muhammad Ali ibn Zubair, in an article entitled, Who is the Evil Dajjal?, elaborates. The Yahudis, Jews, of Isfahan will be his, the Dajjal's, main followers. Apart from having mainly Yahudi followers, he will have a great number of women followers as well. 18. Valiant Code explains that one of the main reasons for Jesus' return is to refute the Jews over the controversial issue that they killed Jesus. However, Jesus will kill them, including their leader, the Antichrist. 19. Listing the events of the last days as they occur, Muhammad Ali ibn Zubair, author of the Signs of Qiyamah, Judgment Day, begins. His followers, the Yahudis, will number 70,000. Then, Hadrat Isa, Honorable Jesus, kills the Dajjal at the gate of Hud, near an Israeli airport, in the valley of Ifak. The final war between the Yahudis will ensue, and the Muslims will be victorious. 20. We will discuss this final war between the Jews and the Muslims in more detail in a later chapter. But for now, it is important to remember that when this final war, or more accurately a final slaughter, occurs, according to Islamic tradition, it is the Muslim Jesus who is the primary instigator of such. Jesus, a good Muslim family man. One final aspect of the Muslim Jesus' return must be pointed out. After converting the world to Islam and killing unbelievers, the Dajjal and his followers, Jesus is said to marry, have children and eventually die. The Prophet said, "There is no prophet between me and him, that is, Jesus. He will destroy the Antichrist and will live on the earth for 40 years and then he will die. The Muslims will pray over him." 21. After his descension, on earth, Jesus will marry. He will have children, and he will remain on the earth 19 years after marriage. He will pass away and Muslims will perform his funeral prayer and bury him next to the Prophet Muhammad. 22. Summary. Now let us review the various defining characteristics and actions of the Muslim Jesus upon his return to the earth. 1. Jesus is said to return to the earth in the last days near a mosque in Damascus. 2. He will arrive at a time when the Mahdi and his army will be preparing to pray. 3. He will be offered to lead the prayer by the Mahdi, but will decline in direct deference to the Mahdi who Jesus declares to be the leader of the Muslims. 4. He will then pray behind the Mahdi as a subordinate. 5. He will be a faithful Muslim. 6. He will make pilgrimage to Mecca. 7. He will visit Muhammad's grave, and salute Muhammad, whereby Muhammad will return the salute from the grave. 8. He will destroy Christianity. 9. He will repeal the jizya tax, thus causing the only option for Jews and Christians to convert to Islam or die. 10. He will establish Islamic Sharia law throughout the entire earth. 11. He will kill the Antichrist and his followers, made up largely of Jews and women. 12. He will remain on the earth for roughly 40 years, during which time he will marry, have children and then die. As we have clearly seen, the Muslim Jesus, in both his nature and actions, is far different than the biblical Jesus. Rather than coming to reign as king and Messiah over all the earth from Jerusalem, Jesus instead comes to convert the world to Islam or kill those who refuse to do so. Instead of coming to save and deliver faithful Christians and Jews, he comes instead to kill and slaughter them. We will discuss a bit more about what the Bible has to say about the return of Jesus in a later chapter. Chapter 7. Comparing the false prophet and the Muslim Jesus. Amazingly, the similarities between the biblical narratives of the end times and the Islamic narratives do not end with the Antichrist and the Mahdi. If it were so, then it might be easier to dismiss the many similarities as mere coincidence. The parallels, however, do not stop with the Antichrist and the Mahdi, but extend again quite clearly into the person of the man biblically known as the false prophet and the man known in Islam as Isa al-Masih, Jesus the Messiah. The specific plan of Satan down through the ages is articulated clearly in the Bible. The Bible teaches that Satan will raise up not one, but two men as his agents in the earth to lure men away from the worship of the one true God. The first man that Satan will use is the Antichrist. We have already examined his role in chapter 5. The second man is known biblically as the false prophet. We will examine his role next. The unholy partnership of the Antichrist and the false prophet. The nature of the relationship of the biblical false prophet to the Antichrist is one of a partner in crime, so to speak. It is only in the final book of the Bible that we learn about the false prophet. The Apostle John was the first and only author of Scripture that received revelation about this assistant to the Antichrist. In Revelation chapter 13, John introduces us to the man described as another beast but spoken of later in Revelation as the false prophet. Then I saw another beast, coming out of the earth. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. He exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. And he performed great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Because of the signs he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast, he deceived the inhabitants of the earth. Revelation 13:11-14. From this passage, we can determine a few things about the false prophet. Firstly, he is called a beast. He is, like the Antichrist, a man possessed by Satan. He is another human pawn of the dragon, exercising the will of the dragon on the earth. But instead of 10 horns, he only has 2. The horns speak of authority. The power and authority of the false prophet is clear, but it is not nearly equal to that of the Antichrist, who is said to have 10 horns. We also see that the false prophet is a miracle worker. Among the many miracles he is said to work, one is mentioned specifically. He is said to cause fire to come down from the sky. The false prophet's primary reason for performing miraculous signs is to cause the inhabitants of the earth to follow and even to worship the Antichrist. The two are pictured as a team, a partnership with one common goal: deception, seduction, and alluring away of anyone who worships Yahweh, the God of the Bible. The unholy partnership of the Mahdi and the Muslim Jesus. Likewise, in the Islamic narrative of the last days, we do not find a lone character who is coming to rescue the world, but instead we find a team. We find both the Mahdi and the Muslim Jesus. And as in the case of the Antichrist and the false prophet, we find that one is clearly filling a supporting role while the other is the leader. While the Mahdi is clearly described as being the vice-regent, caliph, of Allah, 1. Jesus is described as being one who will espouse the cause of the Mahdi. 3. And follow him. 2. The partnership between the Mahdi and Jesus is one of the leader and his subordinate. And as we have already seen, and will continue to see, the partnership of the Mahdi and Jesus is indeed an unholy partnership, particularly if you are not a Muslim and have no intention of becoming one. If this is the case, then you are marked for death, plain and simple. The Muslim Jesus is a twisted version of the biblical Jesus who said, "For I have come down from heaven not to do my will but to do the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I shall lose none of all that he has given me, but raise them up at the last day. For my Father's will is that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day." John 6:38-40. Instead of espousing the cause of the Father, the Muslim Jesus espouses the cause of the Mahdi. Instead of saving those followers of his whom the Father has placed under his oversight, the Muslim Jesus instead slaughters those who remain faithful to the words of Jesus as found in the Bible. The Muslim Jesus is not the tender yet strong shepherd of the Gospels, but rather the wolf himself in the shepherd's clothing. The false prophet as the Antichrist's chief enforcer. The coming of the lawless one, the Antichrist, will be in accordance with the work of Satan displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. They perish because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth but have delighted in wickedness. 2 Thessalonians 2:9-12. Then I saw another beast, coming out of the earth. He performed great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Revelation 13:11-12. We see in the Bible that the false prophet will come with all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. He will perform great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down out of heaven, to deceive the inhabitants of the earth. But after his miracle-working power fails to convert every last person on the earth, his primary drive becomes to set up a system whereby the inhabitants of the earth will have only two options: worship the Antichrist or be killed. The false prophet is said to create some form of image, possibly some form of idol or statue that has the ability to speak. Exactly what this image will be is yet to be seen. He, the false prophet, was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that it could speak and cause all who refuse to worship the image to be killed. Revelation 13:15. There is something highly unusual about this image that could speak and cause all who refuse to worship the image to be killed. Somehow the image itself will have the ability to enforce the law of the false prophet. It will have the ability to cause people to be killed. This seems to work in tangent with the infamous mark of the beast that is part of the false prophet's system. All the inhabitants of the earth will be forced, everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. Revelation 13:17. So biblically speaking, the false prophet is the enforcer of the Antichrist's global worship movement. Imagine for a moment, a miracle-working evangelist who is completely possessed by Satan and refuses to take no for an answer at the threat of death. This is exactly what the false prophet will be. The Muslim Jesus as the Mahdi's chief enforcer. The false Muslim Jesus according to Islam will likewise be the greatest evangelist that the world has ever seen. He fulfills the description of the false prophet in this regard to a T. We see that the false Muslim Jesus, like the false prophet, comes to convert the Christian world to a new religion. In the case of the Muslim Jesus, the religion is, of course, Islam. When Jesus returns, he will personally correct the misrepresentations and misinterpretations about himself. He will affirm the true message that he brought in his time as a prophet, and that he never claimed to be the Son of God. Furthermore, he will reaffirm in his second coming what he prophesied in his first coming, bearing witness to the seal of the messengers, Prophet Muhammad. In his second coming, many non-Muslims will accept Jesus as a servant of Allah Almighty, as a Muslim and a member of the community of Muhammad. Though based merely on this description, Jesus' power to convert seems based more on the simple fact of the persuasiveness of his words, presence, and actions than any specific mention of miracles. Just like the false prophet, however, the Muslim Jesus refuses to take no for an answer. As seen above, Jesus, along with the Mahdi, institutes the Islamic law all over the earth, and in so doing, abolishes the jizya tax, which non-Muslims historically have had the option of paying as protection money, not much unlike the protection money that mafia bosses extort from businesses in their area. After the time that the jizya tax is abolished, all people will be required to embrace Islam, and there will be no other alternative. 5. But what if some still refuse to convert? Then, as we have already seen, the leaders of the so-called religion of peace, the Mahdi and the Muslim Jesus, will have them executed. The false prophet as executioner. From the Bible's description of the false prophet, we learn that one of the primary motives behind his plan in creating this image in honor of the beast is so that those who refuse to worship it are killed. He ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. He was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that it could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. Revelation 13:14-15. Later there is a specific reference to the exact form in which these people will be killed. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony for Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands. Revelation 20:4. The Bible tells us that those who refuse to participate in the system established by the false prophet, who refuse to worship the Antichrist or his image, will be killed. The specific method that the Bible highlights is beheading. We will discuss this fact in more detail in a later chapter. The false prophet will be the greatest executioner that the world has ever known. The Muslim Jesus as executioner. And how different is the Muslim Jesus? We have already examined the Islamic traditions that establish that Jesus will abolish the jizya tax, thus leaving only two options for Christians and Jews worldwide: convert to Islam or die. Jesus, the son of Mary, will soon descend among the Muslims as a just judge. Jesus will, therefore, judge according to the law of Islam. All people will be required to embrace Islam, and there will be no other alternative. The time and the place for the poll tax is before the final descent of Jesus. After his final coming, nothing but Islam will be accepted from them, for taking the poll tax is only effective until Jesus' descent. We have also seen the Islamic traditions that picture Jesus as being the leader of an army that slaughters tens of thousands of Jews who are all said to be followers of the Dajjal, Antichrist. The Yahudis, Jews, will be his main followers. 8. Isa, Jesus, kills the Dajjal at the gate of Hud, near an Israeli airport, in the valley of Ifuk. The final war between the Yahudis will ensue, and the Muslims will be victorious. 9. In the last hour, Muslims will fight with Jews. Since the Jews are an integral part of the army of the Dajjal, and Muslims are the soldiers of the Prophet Jesus, they will fight each other, and the Muslims will become triumphant until even a stone or a tree would say, "Come here, Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, kill him." 10. The biblical false prophet and the Muslim Jesus are both described as establishing a system of law that will enforce the mass execution of anyone who refuses to convert to the new global religion. A dragon in sheep's clothing. We have all heard the expression "a wolf in sheep's clothing." Most people don't know that Jesus is the originator of the saying. Interestingly, when Jesus coined this expression, he was referring specifically to false prophets. The exact phrase was, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves," Matthew 7:15. Likewise, The false prophet to whom all other false prophets are merely a foreshadowing is described by the Apostle John as one who had two horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. Revelation 13:11. This is to say that the false prophet will appear to be mild and gentle, a lamb-like person, but inwardly he is a man who is literally possessed by Satan himself. He will be filled with deception, murder, rage, and hatred. His purpose will be to deceive as many people as he can into worshipping the dragon. The appearance of the false prophet as a lamb may also quite possibly be a reference to notion that the false prophet will claim to literally be the lamb. Jesus Christ, John 1:36, Revelation 5:6-13. This would make sense if we look a bit more closely at Jesus' warnings to his disciples in Matthew chapter 24. Repeatedly, Jesus warns his disciples of the many false prophets who will come in the last days, but in the very first warning that Jesus gives his disciples when they ask him about the nature of the final hour before his return, Jesus says, "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many." Matthew 24:4-5. While I do not believe that every false prophet that will emerge in the last days will literally claim to be Christ himself, it is clear from this passage that some will. And if the false prophet of Revelation 13 is the archetype and very model for all other false prophets, then it also stands to reason that the false prophet may very well claim to be Jesus Christ himself. This of course is a perfectly brilliant, though infinitely evil, plan. Who else better could you imagine to have as your backup man and your primary minister of propaganda than someone whom much of the world believes to be Jesus Christ himself? It appears that this is what Satan has planned for the Antichrist/Mahdi. Conclusion. Muslims are very fond of using Jesus as an evangelistic tool among Christians. Numerous Muslim books have been published which extol the greatness of Jesus and express a deep love for him. One Muslim website even proclaims that Jesus led me to Islam. Muslims use Jesus as a lure to draw Christians in order to convince them of the truth of Islam. But the advertised Jesus of Islam is much different than the Muslim Jesus that comes to reveal his true identity as the most radical of fundamentalist Muslims. The Jesus that returns in Muslim tradition makes Osama bin Laden look like a novice. He is pictured as coming to establish Islamic law across the face of the planet that would legalize the execution of anyone who refuses to convert to Islam. He is pictured as leading the army that will slaughter tens of thousands of Jews who are said to be followers of the Dajjal. If ever such a person existed that could rightly be described as a beast, then surely, the Muslim Jesus is such a man. Muslims are awaiting a man to come that will claim to be Jesus Christ. He would be presented as a lamb. If such a man ever exists, he will claim according to Islamic tradition, that he has been alive in heaven for the past 2,000 years, waiting to return to complete his life and accomplish his mission on the earth. Such a man would be a liar. He would be a true student of his master, the father of lies. He would come to fulfill what the Bible expresses to be the chief boiling desires of Satan, to either deceive Christians and Jews, indeed the entire earth, into worshipping him or to slaughter them. In the Bible, we see that it is for these very purposes that Satan will empower his false prophet. The biblical description of the false prophet and the Islamic description of the Muslim Jesus, on all the essential points, are identical. Chapter 8. The Dajjal, Islam's Antichrist. The third primary character that dominates Islamic eschatology is a man whose full title is Al-Masih, the Messiah, Ad-Dajjal, the liar/deceiver. Usually just referred to as the Dajjal, he is a bizarre character whose description and story seem far more fantastic than either the Mahdi or the Muslim Jesus. There are numerous hadith that contain descriptions of the Dajjal. Here we will just touch on the most common of these traditions to give an overview of just who this mysterious and strange person is. The Great Deceiver. The Dajjal is described as being a deceiver who will have miraculous powers and who will temporarily hold power over the whole earth. The Prophet was warning us that in the last days there would be someone who would deceive all of humanity. The Dajjal will possess power over this world. Thus, Muslims must be careful not to have the love of the world in their hearts, so they won't leave their religion and follow him. He will be able to heal the sick by wiping his hand on them, like Jesus did, but with this deceit the Dajjal will lead people down the path to hell. Thus the Dajjal is the false Messiah, or Antichrist, Masih ad-Dajjal. He will pretend to be the Messiah, and deceive people by showing them amazing powers. He is one-eyed. Possibly the most frequently quoted reference to the Dajjal is that he is blind in one eye. The hadith, however, are contradictory regarding which eye is blind. Allah's Messenger made a mention of Dajjal in the presence of the people and said, Allah is not one-eyed, and behold that Dajjal is blind of the right eye, and his eye would be like a floating grape. Allah's Messenger said, Dajjal is blind of left eye with thick hair, and there would be a garden and fire with him, and his fire would be a garden, and his garden would be fire. Infidel. The Dajjal is sometimes said to have the word infidel, kafir, written in between his eyes, possibly on his forehead. But this word will only be perceptible to true Muslims, and no one else. Allah's Messenger said, Dajjal is blind of one eye, and there is written between his eyes the word kafir, unbeliever/infidel. He then spelled the word as kfr, which every Muslim would be able to read. Very important is that, this word kafir will be readable only by the believer, literate or illiterate. Non-believer, let him be educated from Oxford or Harvard, will not be able to read it. A false miracle worker. Sheikh Kabani describes some of the Dajjal's miraculous powers. The Dajjal will have powers of the devil. He will terrorize the Muslims into following him, converting them into unbelief. He will conceal the truth and bring forth falsehood. The Prophet said that the Dajjal will have the power to show the image of one's dead ancestors on his hand, like a television screen. The relative will say, "Oh my son. This man is correct. I am in paradise because I was good and I believed in him." In reality that relative is in hell. If the relative says, "Believe in this man, I am in hell because I didn't believe," one must say to the Dajjal, "No, he is in paradise." This is false. The Prophet said, the Dajjal will say to a Bedouin Arab, "What will you think if I bring your father and mother back to life for you? Will you bear witness that I am your Lord?" The Bedouin will say, "Yes." So two devils will assume the appearance of his father and mother, and say, "Oh my son, follow him for he is your Lord." The Dajjal will claim to be Jesus Christ and will claim to be divine. The above tradition shows that the Dajjal's deceptive signs will be for the purpose of leading people into believing that the Dajjal is actually their Lord. Muslim scholars universally have concluded that the Dajjal will claim to be divine. According to the very well-known Muslim scholar, Abu Amina Bilal Phillips, the Dajjal will claim to be God. While there are no specific traditions that state such directly, as a result of the fact that the Dajjal is, according to Islamic tradition, the false Jewish Messiah who claims to be God, most Muslims have deduced that the Dajjal will thus claim to be Jesus Christ by name. The Dajjal and his magic mule. Muslim scholar Muhammad Ali ibn Zubair Ali says of the Dajjal, he will travel at great speeds and his means of conveyance will be a giant mule. He will travel the entire world. As strange as this is, it also bears a faint resemblance to Jesus the Messiah, who also rode a donkey as he entered Jerusalem during the final week of his ministry. Cities of refuge. It is said that there are 3 cities that the Dajjal may not enter: Mecca, Medina, and Damascus. Muslims are encouraged to seek refuge from the Dajjal in one of these 3 cities. The Prophet said, Ad-Dajjal will come to Medina and find the angels guarding it. So Allah willing, neither Ad-Dajjal, nor plague will be able to come near it. The coming of the Antichrist, Dajjal, must occur in the last days. This dreadful event is approaching, and in that time only 3 cities will be safe: Mecca, Medina, and Sham, Damascus. If anyone wants safety in that time, he will have to run to one of these 3 cities. Apart from these 3 cities, it is said that the Dajjal will enter every single city, town, and village in the world to test and possibly deceive every human alive. A surah of protection. Muslims believe that if they memorize a particular portion of the Quran that they will be protected from the Dajjal. It is somewhat like a verbal amulet that protects one from the powers of evil. If the Dajjal comes upon someone who has memorized the first 10 verses of Surat Al-Kahf, chapter of the cave, he cannot harm him. And whoever memorizes the last verses of Surat Al-Kahf will have light on the day of judgment. He will be Jewish and will be followed by Jews and women. Based on various Islamic traditions, Muslims believe that the Dajjal will be Jewish. The title of a book by Muslim author Matlab Ahmed Kazmi, Emergence of the Dajjal, the Jewish king couldn't make this point more clearly. Imam Sheikh Ibrahim Mahdi of the Palestinian Authority articulated the Islamic perspective regarding the expectation of the Jewish people quite well in one of his sermons. The Jews await the false Jewish Messiah, while we await, with Allah's help, the Mahdi and Jesus, peace be upon him. Jesus's pure hands will murder the false Jewish Messiah. Where? In the city of Lod, in Palestine. Palestine will be, as it was in the past, a graveyard for the invaders. Samuel Shahid, a Christian Arab scholar in his scholarly study of Islamic eschatology says of the Dajjal that he will be, the embodiment of the Jewish hope and longing. The bulk of his army is recruited from the Jews. As mentioned in the last chapter, the followers of the Dajjal will primarily consist of Jews and women. It is mentioned that women are very ignorant and as such are easily misled. The Lion Code states, meanwhile, women will also fall to the deviant line of the Antichrist because of their unawareness and ignorance of Islam. Slain by the Muslim Jesus. As mentioned in the last chapter, it will be the Muslim Jesus who will kill the Dajjal and his followers. Allah's messenger said, "The time of prayer shall come and then Jesus son of Mary would descend and would lead them in prayer. When the enemy of Allah, Dajjal, would see him, Allah would kill them by his, Jesus, hand and he would show them their blood on his lance, the lance of Jesus Christ." Chapter 9. Comparing the biblical Jesus and the Dajjal. The third amazing parallel between biblical eschatology and Islamic eschatology is the person of the Dajjal, the Islamic Antichrist figure. Despite all of the wild and fantastic descriptions of the Dajjal, if we boil down the Muslim belief regarding the Dajjal to its simplest and most important terms, we basically have a man who will claim to be divine and will claim to be Jesus Christ the Jewish Messiah. He will defend Israel against the Mahdi and the Muslim Jesus and he will deceive many people into leaving Islam. While I certainly do not believe that there will ever come a figure into the world as described in the Islamic traditions, a great deceiver who is blind in one eye, flying around the earth on some form of giant mule, there will however come Jesus, the real one, who will in many very crucial ways, fulfill the Muslim expectations of the Dajjal. The return of Jesus Christ. The real Jesus, however, will indeed come as a divine defender of Israel and her people as well as Israel's spiritual children, the Christians. If the Islamic prophecies are indeed intertwined with the unfolding of biblical prophecy, then we can see that part of Satan's strategy is that when the real Jesus returns, there will already be a worldwide religious leader who will also be claiming to be Jesus, namely the false prophet. If this were the case, then Muslims worldwide would accuse the real Jesus of being the Dajjal, the Muslim Antichrist/Great Deceiver. Muslims would be particularly convinced of this in light of the fact that the surviving Jews of the earth will acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah. At least 600 years before Islam ever existed, the Jewish prophets and the Jewish apostles described the event of Jesus returning to Israel, defeating her enemies and finally gaining full acceptance among the Jewish people. On that day I, the Lord, will set out to destroy all the nations that attack Jerusalem. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. Zechariah 12:10. A day of the Lord is coming, the Lord will go out and fight against those nations, as he fights in the day of battle. On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. Zechariah 14:1-3-4. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion, he will turn godlessness away from Jacob. Romans 11:26. Put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. Then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, Jesus the Messiah, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And they sang a new song. Revelation 7:3-4, 14:1-3. We see that when Jesus returns to destroy all the nations that attack Jerusalem, his feet will, literally, stand on the Mount of Olives. Jesus will be physically present in Israel. At this time, it is said that those Jews who are alive in Israel will see him and realize that he is the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him. Thus the acknowledgement of Jesus as the genuine Jewish Messiah and divine Savior will fill their hearts, and so all Israel will be saved. The Islamic traditions. Of course, based on the Islamic traditions, Muslims are expecting Jews to acknowledge the Dajjal as the divine Jewish Messiah. Thus in the Islamic mind, the Jesus of biblical tradition will fulfill the three most primary Islamic expectations of the Dajjal. Clearly, these traditions will be used by Satan, not only to preempt the Muslims of the earth from receiving the real Jesus when he comes, but literally to empower them to attack him. The plot never seems to stop thickening. Consider the following statement by the well-known Muslim apologist, Osama Abdullah. The question posited to him was, what do Muslims believe about the end of the world and Jesus' part in it? His answer is astonishing as it relates to this discussion. Briefly, Christians believe that Jesus will come down to earth and fight for the state of Israel. What seems to be quite ironic to me is that those Jews that Jesus is supposedly going to fight for don't even believe in Jesus as God himself nor as a messenger of God. Jesus never liked the Jews. Now, without being biased, we Muslims have a story that makes a lot more sense and is empty of contradictions. We believe that Jesus will come down to earth toward the end of the world time to fight the army of Satan, which will be mostly from the bad Jews or Zionist Jews as we call them today, and the deceived from the polytheist Christians or the Trinitarian Christians and the pagan polytheists such as Hindus, Buddhists, etc. Some Jews and many Christians will be among the good and blessed who will fight with Jesus' side. The army of Satan will be led by a person who will claim to be Jesus Christ himself. The Muslims will call him the Dajjal or the deceiver. The real Jesus army will fight the Dajjal's army and defeat him. The empire of Israel will fall, and the religion of Islam will prevail. This is quite amazing. We see that as a direct result of the Islamic apocalyptic traditions, Muslims are expecting two Jesuses to come, the real one and the false one. By Mr. Abdullah's admission, the real Jesus will be identifiable by the fact that he does not like Jews, indeed he is expected to attack and slaughter them. Likewise the false Jesus, according to Islam, will be clearly identifiable by the fact that he will defend the Jews. Thus, as we have seen, Mr. Abdullah and Muslims everywhere are expecting the Muslim Jesus, along with his leader, the Mahdi, to attack Israel and do battle against him who Christians understand to be the real Jesus. The Battle of Armageddon as prophesied in the Bible may indeed be coming into very clear focus. Chapter 10. The Revived Islamic Empire of the Antichrist. While the information that we have covered thus far is certainly quite interesting, ultimately, if Islam is indeed the primary vehicle that Satan will use to fulfill his final rebellion against God, it is the Bible that must be the primary litmus test. What does the Bible say about the nature and the makeup of the Antichrist's empire? The Bible is abounding with proofs that the Antichrist empire will consist only of nations that are today, all Islamic. If one were to do a thorough study of all of the various examples of such from the various Hebrew prophets, it would require an extensive study. But for brevity and our purposes here, we will present a limited argument based on some portions of scripture from the book of Ezekiel and the book of Revelation. Despite the numerous and prevailing arguments made for the future emergence of a revived European Roman Empire as the Antichrist's power base, we will see quite clearly that today, all of the specific nations that the Bible mentions that will make up the Antichrist Empire are all Muslim nations. Pretty simple. This fact leaves us with only a couple of options. The first option is to assume that before the coming of the Antichrist, most of these Islamic nations will experience significant transformation and leave their Islamic roots behind. There are problems with this option. While there are ample reports of individual Muslims coming to follow Jesus from throughout the Muslim world, there are really no concrete signs of any of these nations abandoning their Islamic roots on a larger scale. In fact, many of the nations that we will look at are presently seeing a resurgence of Islamic fundamentalism sweeping throughout their lands. Nevertheless, I have heard Bible teachers for years express that before the coming of the last days, Islam as a religion would basically fizzle out and become entirely irrelevant. The present reality, long-term statistical trends, simply do not bear this out. The other option is really far more reasonable, which is to simply conclude that indeed, the future Antichrist empire will be an Islamic empire. This one fact alone, that of the Islamic dominance of all of the participant nations in the Antichrist empire, should be enough to make most Bible scholars and students of eschatology at least consider the role of Islam in the last days very seriously. In this chapter we will examine exactly which modern nations the Bible says will be the primary players in the last days empire of the Antichrist. Ezekiel's identification. The prophet Ezekiel actually lists the nations of this final empire quite specifically as he prophesies the future attack of the Antichrist empire against Israel. In the 38th chapter of his book, Ezekiel begins by directly addressing the Antichrist, whom the Lord refers to by the unusual name of Gog. The name Gog is a specific title particular to a ruler from the land of Magog. It could be likened to the Pharaoh and Egypt. Pharaoh is an ancient title particular to rulers of Egypt, and Gog was a title particular to the land of Magog. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, prophesy against him and say, This is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets, also Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes gathered about you, and take command of them. Ezekiel 38:1-7. I encourage you to open your Bible and read through all of Ezekiel 38 slowly. The specificity in which Ezekiel describes modern-day Israel is quite astonishing. Prophesying to the Antichrist, Ezekiel says, In future years you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. Israel is described as the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods. Clearly Ezekiel was describing the Israel of today. So Ezekiel gives us the specific names of countries that will be involved in the invasion of Israel, which will be led by Gog. Listed in order, they are Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer and Beth Togarmah, as well as many nations with you. Is Gog Antichrist? There is a divergence of opinion among prophecy teachers and Bible scholars regarding the identification of Gog and his coalition of nations. The majority position for the past few decades, however, is that the invading army of nations described in Ezekiel 38-39 is not the army of Antichrist, but of another army led by another world leader. I personally reject the idea that Gog is anyone other than Antichrist. While a smaller book could be written examining all of the various reasons why this is so, for now, we will only very briefly examine two of the primary reasons why I think this is untenable. Thou shalt have no other Gog. There are two specific mentions of Gog and Magog in the Bible. Gog is mentioned not only in Ezekiel but also in the book of Revelation. Let us look at the passage from Revelation. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. In number they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil, who deceived them, was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Revelation 20:7-10. Even after the earthly 1,000-year reign of Christ from Jerusalem, the Bible says that yet another army will form to attack the holy city of Jerusalem. Again, the leader of this army is called Gog and his army, Magog. Those who take the position that Gog is not the Antichrist must wrestle through the fact that this Gog and his armies are resurrected, so to speak, at least 1,000 years after the first Gog. This is a difficulty. Obviously, the first Gog and Magog shares more than a mere name with the second Gog and Magog. There is a correlation between the two that extends beyond this very unusual title. Those who see Gog and the Antichrist as two separate entities must be able to explain just what similarities the Gog of Ezekiel and the Gog of Revelation bear that merits them both carrying the same name. Actually, in order to estimate who Gog is, all one must really do is take a look at who Antichrist is. Antichrist, quite simply, is the devil incarnate, or at least the closet thing to it. There are actually passages of scripture that shift from speaking of Satan to speaking of the Antichrist seamlessly, as if they are one and the same. See for instance Isaiah 14, and as we have seen, Satan will even share his worship with Antichrist. Simply stated, Antichrist is Satan's puppet that he will use to attack Jerusalem. And at least in the book of Revelation, Gog is also Satan's puppet that will serve the very same purpose. In terms of both role and function, Antichrist and the Gog of Revelation are essentially the same. Even as Satan will raise up a man to carry out his work in the days to come, so will Satan also raise up a man to carry out his final rebellion against God one more time at the end of the millennium. Both times, the leader of Satan's rebellion against Jerusalem is referred to as Gog and his army is called Magog. Why should we view the basic nature of the first Gog as being any different than the second? Those who view Ezekiel's Gog as a competitor to Antichrist find themselves taking a very inconsistent position. But if you are not yet sure, consider this second point. Ezekiel says specifically of Gog that the prophets spoke of him in times past. This is what the sovereign Lord says, "Are you not the one I spoke of in former days by my servants the prophets of Israel? At that time they prophesied for years that I would bring you against them." Ezekiel 38:17. The question must be asked then, if Gog and Magog are spoken of by Israel's former prophets prior to Ezekiel, then where are all of these references? One will be very hard-pressed to find any unless one does some serious stretching of the scriptures. But if we take the position that Gog is Antichrist, then it is very easy to find numerous passages about Antichrist and his invading army throughout the prophets. While there are several more very good arguments to support this view, I will assume that this is enough to move on. Gog and the Antichrist are one and the same. Now let us take a look at which specific nations will make up Gog's coalition. Rosh. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, prophesy against him. Ezekiel 38:2. Some Bible translations differ on how to interpret the portion of this verse that says, the chief prince of. In Hebrew, the word translated as chief prince is Rosh. The problem is that while Rosh most probably means prince, or head, some argue that it should be treated as a proper noun, referring to the name of a place. Those who feel as though it is a place, use the word Rosh to find Russia here as one of the nations. The basis for doing so of course is due primarily to the similar sound of the two words. This opinion is also supported by the fact that Ezekiel specifically says that Gog would come from the north. While indeed, Russia is perfectly north of Israel, the actual interpretation of the word Rosh, however, is based on a bogus principle. One cannot simply take a word from an ancient Semitic language, in this case, Hebrew, and find a correlation to a modern name from a drastically different language, in this case an early form of Scandinavian, simply because the two words sound the same. The Hebrew word Rosh is used well over 500 other times in the Bible and is each time interpreted as meaning head, chief, top, best, or something similar. It is the same Rosh that we find in Rosh Hashanah, the chief day of the year, the Jewish New Year. Also, consider this: of the 8 nations mentioned, all except one are grandsons of Noah. The other is Persia. Persia, however, was a very well-known nation in Ezekiel's day, having formerly been the head of the Medo-Persian Empire that ruled the entire Middle East. Now juxtapose this to Russia, which did not even exist in Ezekiel's day. To simply attempt to toss Rosh into the mix, an alleged name that is neither a descendant of Noah nor a well-known nation of that day, is certainly out of place. As Bible scholar Dr. Merrill F. Unger admits, linguistic evidence for the equation of Rosh with Russia is confessedly only presumptive. During the Cold War, of course, this opinion was a popular one. The reasoning of many was that because Russia was the head of the great communist, read, atheist, Soviet Union, surely such an anti-God empire was the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. But we must be very careful not to read our assumptions or modern events into Scripture. We must allow Scripture to speak for itself. Unfortunately, many Bible teachers still seem to cling to this interpretation. The notion that Russia is specifically mentioned here in Ezekiel is a strong, if not irresponsible stretch, and certainly should not be treated as anything more than a mere speculation built on a very weak foundation. Satan's coalition of the willing. Now let us identify the nations that are mentioned. Of the 8 nations that are mentioned, specifically, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer and Togarmah, 7 are mentioned in the book of Genesis as being descendants of Noah and his 3 sons. Bible scholars and historians are able to trace the names of Noah's sons to certain people groups and regions and thus to identify them with modern nations. While the identification of some of these people groups is somewhat debatable, there is a general measure of agreement among Bible scholars as to their identification. Meshech and Tubal. Regarding Meshech and Tubal, here again, we find some prophecy teachers once again giving them a Russian identification. Many very well-known prophecy teachers base their opinions primarily on the fact that the Scofield Study Bible identifies these 2 nations as correlating to the modern Russian cities of Moscow and Tobolsk. The problem again is that the basis of this interpretation comes primarily from the similar sound of the words Meshech, Moscow, and Tubal, Tobolsk. While this may be convincing to some, the weakness of this reasoning has already been discussed above. Again, unless one can legitimately trace the roots of a particular word back to its Hebrew origin, then the argument is based on very weak evidence. It is a forcing of the puzzle piece where it doesn't naturally fit. Mark Hitchcock, a well-known Bible teacher, accurately points out that Meshech and Tubal are mentioned in Ezekiel 27:13 as trading partners with ancient Tyre. Tyre was in what is today Lebanon. It is highly doubtful, says Hitchcock, that ancient Tyre was trading with people as far north as Moscow and Tobolsk. In fact, it is questionable whether or not these areas were even very well populated in Ezekiel's day. Hitchcock concludes that a closer study of these names reveals that Meshech and Tubal are the ancient Moski/Mushki and Tubalu/Tibereni peoples who dwelled in the area around, primarily south of, the Black and Caspian Seas in Ezekiel's day. These nations today are in the modern country of Turkey, possibly parts of southern Russia and northern Iran. Meshech was located near what was known as Phrygia, in Central and Western Asia Minor, while Tubal was located in Eastern Asia Minor. So with Meshech and Tubal, we are dealing with portions of modern Turkey. Today this region is predominantly Islamic. While modern Turkey has undergone a drastic secularization in the last century, within even just the past few years there have also been some quiet, though very strong trends toward a return to a stronger Islamic identification. Magog. Regarding the identity of Magog, there is some difference of opinion among Bible teachers and historians. Referring to the Magogites, the Matthew Henry Complete Commentary on the Whole Bible speaks of this diversity of opinion. Some think they find them Gog and Magog afar off, in Scythia, Tartary, and southern Russia. Others think they find them nearer the land of Israel, in Syria and Asia, the less Turkey. For those who argue for a Scythian connection find their best argument in a reference from the ancient Jewish historian Josephus, who wrote, Magog founded the Magogians, thus named after him, but who by the Greeks are called Scythians. Hitchcock says of the Scythians, the ancient Scythians were a great nomadic tribe who inhabited the ancient territory from Central Asia all across the southern part of ancient Russia. The descendants of Magog were the original inhabitants of the plateau of Central Asia. Today the land of Magog is inhabited by the former Soviet republics of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and possibly even northern parts of modern Afghanistan. Former Muslim Walid Shubat agrees. Shubat points out that, the Schaff-Herzog Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge, citing ancient Assyrian writings, places the location of Magog in the landmass between ancient Armenia and Media, in short, the republics south of Russia and north of Israel, comprised of Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, Turkestan, Chechnya, Turkey, Iran, and Dagestan. Significantly, all of them are Muslim nations. Thus, while the specific nations that comprise Magog may be partially in question, the same general area is agreed upon. We are dealing with Asia Minor, and possibly parts of Central Asia, some of the southern regions of the former Soviet Union. Today, Islam dominates this entire region. What if we take the alternative interpretation made by some Bible scholars, that Magog is speaking of Syria? Even if this were the case, we still have an Islamic nation. But here is the real key to identifying Magog, by identifying Meshech and Tubal, which we have already done. The reason for this is the wording of Ezekiel, Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief, or head, of Meshech and Tubal. Magog is the head of land of Meshech and Tubal. We have already seen that Meshech and Tubal are located in modern-day Turkey. Thus it would be foolish to assume that Magog as their head is in some other distant region or nation. While it seems more likely that Magog is either a portion of Turkey or a conglomerate of the former Soviet Turkikistans, whether it be these or Syria, we are definitely dealing with an Islamic entity. This point is essential. Because we know that Gog, the Antichrist, will come from the land of Magog, which is definitely an Islamic region, it's very unlikely that he will not be a Muslim. While I suppose that anything is possible, particularly in the distant future, it is very hard to imagine a non-Muslim ruling over any one of these nations, at least not anyone who doesn't outwardly pose as a Muslim. Now, let us move on to identify the remaining member states of Antichrist's coalition. Persia. Persia is very easy to identify. Essentially, Persia is modern-day Iran. Many Iranians in America, if asked where they are from, will simply say they are from Persia. In fact, Iran was still called Persia until 1935. Obviously, Iran is a predominantly Muslim nation. While there are some wonderful signs of change in Iran due to a growing dissatisfaction with Islam among Iran's massive youth population, it does not seem likely that a majority of Iranians will leave behind its Islamic roots anytime soon. Kush. Kush is also relatively easy to identify. Some Bible translations merely interpret Kush as Ethiopia, though this is not accurate. The Kush of Ezekiel's day was far more northwest than the Ethiopia of today. In Scripture, Kush was often associated with Egypt and was a border nation to her. Egypt will become a desolate wasteland. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Because you said, "The Nile is mine, I made it," Therefore I am against you and against your streams, and I will make the land of Egypt a ruin and a desolate waste from Migdol northern Egypt to Aswan today in southern Egypt, as far as the border of Cush. Ezekiel 29:9-10. Also, one of Cush's defining characteristics was her rivers. Isaiah 18:1. Being a border nation with Egypt, the rivers were most likely the 5 rivers that fed the Nile. Of course, the context of Ezekiel is the best context to interpret where Ezekiel was referring. If we look at a map, the Nile River flows directly into the southern border of Egypt from the modern nation of Sudan. In the nation of Sudan, there are 5 rivers which all merge to feed the Nile to the north. The only legitimate identification of Cush then is modern Sudan, officially known as the Islamic Republic of Sudan since the 1989. While Sudan does have a large Christian minority, it is ruled by the Muslim majority. Today Sudan is an absolute cesspool of Islamic oppression toward the minority Christians. The Sudanese government is Islamist to its core. As Hitchcock accurately says, one would be hard-pressed to find a more rabid enemy of Israel and the West today than Sudan. Sudan is thus identified as another Islamic participant in the Antichrist's empire. Put. Biblically, Put, or Phut, is the region west of Egypt. Today this is the nation of Libya. The Septuagint translates the word Put here as Libya. Most modern scholars seem to agree with this interpretation. Shubat however includes Algeria, Morocco, and Tunis along with Libya. Either way, we again have another region or nation that is entirely Islamic. Gomer. Gomer, it seems to be almost universally agreed upon among scholars, refers to the Celtic Cimmerians of Crim-Tartary. 8. Regarding the identification of Gomer, Baptist pastor Fred Zaspel accurately points out that Gomer is well known to the ancient world as Gimri of North-Central Asia Minor Cappadocia. These people are also known as the Cimmerians. This seems to be the simplest, most obvious interpretation. 9. So Gomer is Gimra is Samaria is Cappadocia. Cappadocia is simply central Turkey. Again, another Islamic region. Togarma. Zaspel again sums up the identity of Togarma quite well. Togarma was a descendant of Noah through Japheth and Gomer, General 10:1-3. He is known to Assyrian records as Tilgarimu. Tilgarimu was a city-state in eastern Anatolia, Asia Minor, modern Turkey, more specifically, as Riri states, the southeastern part of Turkey near the Syrian border. This identification is generally acknowledged by all. 10. Once more then we have another region that is in present-day Turkey. Assessing the 8 nations. Thus in the final assessment we have 5 of the 8 nations mentioned by Ezekiel occupying modern Turkey and possibly some of the southern Russian regions near the Caucasus Mountains as well as some of the Turkic nations of Central Asia. Obviously, the Lord directed Ezekiel to significantly highlight Turkey. The other 3 nations mentioned, Libya, Sudan, and Iran, together with Turkey form a perfect circle around Israel. Turkey covers Israel's entire northern horizon, while Iran is east of Israel, Sudan is south, and Libya is to the west. Israel finds herself surrounded on all 4 corners by the Islamic nations of the Antichrist Empire. While many Bible teachers have for years prophesied a coming invasion of Israel headed by Russia, we see that the Bible simply does not substantiate this position. In fact, it is fair to say that the entire argument for a primary Russian involvement is based on weak scholarship and actually requires a violation of basic linguistic norms. Instead, we see an Islamic invasion of Israel, most likely led by Turkey and involving minimally 3 or more other Islamic nations. While there is always the temptation to read one's enemies into Scripture, we should instead simply take the Bible for what it says. While presently, there is not any pressing reason to see Turkey as the leader of an imminent world empire, this is nevertheless what Ezekiel prophesied. And as we are about to see, this is indeed confirmed through other portions of Scripture as well. What is the 7th and the 8th empire? Beyond the above identification of the nations of Ezekiel 38, the book of Revelation also confirms the notion that indeed the region of Turkey will be the head of the future Antichrist empire. Let us examine these passages from the book of Revelation. There I saw a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. Revelation 17:3. Here we see the final beast empire of the Antichrist. The beast is seen to have 7 heads and 10 horns. We already know from the book of Daniel that the 10 horns represent the 10 nations or kings that will comprise the Antichrist empire. But the 7 heads are 7 empires that have existed throughout history that all have been foreshadows of the final empire that is to come. As usual, whenever a prophecy is given in the Bible that may be difficult in its symbolism, the Bible clarifies the symbolism and explains the passage for us. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, but when he does come, he must remain for a little while. The beast who once was, and now is not, is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. Revelation 17:9-11. Now the 7 heads are called 7 mountains. The Bible often uses mountains as a symbol representing a kingdom or an empire. But most importantly, this passage gives us insight into the fact that before Jesus returns, there will actually have been a total of 8 beast empires. The 8th empire will be ruled by the Antichrist. How can this passage help us gain insight into the identification of the final Antichrist empire? First, we see that at the time that it was written to John, 5 of the empires had already fallen. This is seen in the phrase, 5 have been. These empires are generally accepted by Bible teachers as being the following: the Egyptian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire. After these 5, the angel tells John that one empire is. At the time that John wrote the book of Revelation, Rome was. It ruled the Middle East, Northern Africa, and much of Europe. Thus the 6th empire was the Roman Empire. The next empire, of course, is the 7th, and then the 8th will be the empire of the Antichrist. So the 7th empire is the empire that we need to identify. Because according to the verse above, it is the 8th empire that will be a resurrection or a revived version of the 7th empire. The beast who once was, and is not, is an 8th king. Let me just paraphrase this portion for clarity. The 7th beast, empire, that existed, but then did not exist, will come back as an 8th empire. So if we are now waiting for the final 8th empire, then what was the 7th? What empire followed Rome? Because of the harsh anti-Semitic nature of the German Third Reich, some Bible teachers have speculated that Germany was the 7th empire and thus Germany will come back as the 8th. The most common belief, however, held almost universally by Bible teachers, is that the Antichrist empire will be a revived Roman Empire. There are, however, some glaring problems with this theory. Firstly, Rome was the 6th empire. If Rome was the 6th, and will also be the last, then what happened to the 7th? This theory has a gaping hole. Is Rome the 6th, 7th, and the 8th empires? Neither scripture nor history nor common sense supports this. Secondly, every one of the previous 6 empires ruled the Middle East, including Jerusalem. This is very important. We must always remember that the Bible is thoroughly Jerusalem-centric. It is not America-centric, nor is it Western-centric. In the biblical view of things, Jerusalem is the center of the earth. This point cannot be underscored enough. Any theory that revolves around a revived Roman Empire based in Europe, for instance on the European common market, is a foreign concept to the Bible. Unless the empire rules over or directly affects Jerusalem, it is actually a bit irrelevant to biblical mindset. And the third crucial point is that if we look at the first 6 empires, each succeeding empire either destroyed or absorbed the empire that preceded it. There is a very natural succession. If we look at each empire, we see that they all fulfill these two characteristics: they ruled over Jerusalem and they defeated or absorbed their predecessor. The Egyptian Empire ruled all of Egypt and Israel as well. But the Assyrian Empire defeated the Egyptian Empire and likewise ruled over a vast portion of the Middle East, including Israel. After this, the Babylonian Empire defeated the Assyrian Empire and became even larger than its predecessor, again, ruling over Israel. Such is the pattern with each successive empire. The Medo-Persian Empire succeeded the Babylonian Empire only to be succeeded by the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire was in turn succeeded by the Roman Empire. Which leads us to the Seventh Empire. Who overcame the Roman Empire? In order to answer this question, we need to briefly review the fall of the Roman Empire. What exactly happened? In 395 AD, the Roman Empire was divided into two portions, the eastern and the western portions. The eastern portion became known as the Byzantine Empire. In 410 AD, the western capital city of Rome fell to invading Germanic tribes known as the Visigoths or barbarians. The western/European half of the empire, including its capital, had fallen, but the Roman Empire nevertheless continued. How so? It simply shifted its capital and its throne from Rome to Constantinople, 1,000 miles east. The Western European portion of the Roman Empire fell, but the Eastern Byzantine portion of the Roman Empire lived on for nearly another 1,000 years with Constantinople as its capital. The Roman Empire didn't actually completely fall until the eastern portion of the empire finally fell to the Turks in 1453 AD. Likewise, it was the Islamic Caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab that took Jerusalem in 637. Thus we see that it was the various manifestations of Islamic empire culminating with the Ottoman Empire that succeeded the Roman Empire and ruled over the entire Middle East, beginning with Jerusalem for over 1,300 years. The Turkish Empire existed right up until 1909. Thus we see that the only empire that fulfills the patterns necessary to be considered the Seventh Empire is the Turkish/Ottoman Empire. This of course corresponds perfectly with Ezekiel's list of nations with such a heavy emphasis on Turkey. The coming restoration of the Caliphate. The Turkish Empire was the seat of the Islamic Caliphate. It was not until 1923 that the Islamic Caliphate was officially abolished. Today the Islamic world is awaiting the restoration of that caliphate. The Bible teaches that someday soon the Turkish Empire will be revived. The inhabitants of the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world will be astonished when they see the beast, because he once was, then he was not, and yet came again. Revelation 17:8. At that time, we may expect to see the Islamic Caliphate restored. Eventually this position will possibly be given to a man whom the Muslim world would refer to as the Mahdi, but whom people of understanding would identify as the man known biblically as the Antichrist. Chapter 11. The Dark Nature of Muhammad's Revelations. We begin our further critical examination of Islam with the person of Muhammad and his revelations. For this is where it all started. If we expect to accurately discern the spirit of Islam, then we must begin at the foundation, we must examine the seed. Muhammad is the founder of Islam and is believed by Muslims to be the sole human instrument that received the words of the Quran directly from Allah. This chapter will review the nature of Muhammad's spiritual encounters that led to his career as a prophet and birthed the religion that now has the attention of the world. The birth of the Quran. Muslims believe that when Muhammad received the revelations that have been compiled to make up the Quran, he received them word for word, directly from Allah. As such, Allah is thought to be the actual author of the Quran. The Quran is thus intended to be read as if it is Allah speaking directly in the first person. Muhammad is merely viewed as the human messenger, or the apostle of Allah, Rasul Allah. As one Muslim theologian has said, the prophet was purely passive, indeed unconscious. The book was in no sense his, neither its thought, nor language, nor style, all was of God, and the prophet was merely a recording pen. This stands in distinction to the Christian view of the nature of inspiration of the Bible. Christians understand that while God indeed inspired the authors of Scripture to convey his thoughts and words, each individual author brought to the Scriptures his own individual human style and personality. God used the human agents as his vessels, but he did not literally override them. As we will see, this was not the manner of Muhammad's revelations. Karen Armstrong, a popular and highly sympathetic writer about Islam and Muhammad, gives this account of the manner of Muhammad's initial encounter with what Muslims believe was Gabriel, Jibril, the angel in the cave of Hira. Muhammad was torn from his sleep in his mountain cave and felt himself overwhelmed by a devastating divine presence. Later he explained this ineffable experience by saying that an angel had enveloped him in a terrifying embrace so that it felt as though the breath was being forced from his body. The angel gave him the curt command, "Iqra." Recite. Muhammad protested that he could not recite, he was not a kahin, one of the ecstatic prophets of Arabia. But, he said, the angel simply embraced him again until, just as he thought he had reached the end of his endurance, he found the divinely inspired words of a new scripture pouring forth from his mouth. Armstrong mistakenly, however, does not mention that it was not actually until the third time that the angel had strangled Muhammad, demanding that he recite, that he finally did so. 3. This encounter stands in stark contrast to the general nature of angelic and divine encounters found throughout the Bible, where the angels, or the Lord himself, almost always are found beginning their conversation with the comforting phrase, "Do not be afraid." Genesis 15:1, 26:24, 46:3, Daniel 8:15-19, 10:12-19, Matthew 28:5-10, Luke 1:13, Luke 1:26-31, 2:10, Revelation 1:17. We should not be surprised to find out then, that after Muhammad's terrifying and violent encounter with the spirit in the cave, he literally believed that he was demon-possessed. Muhammad became so distraught that he even became suicidal. From Guillaume's translation of Ibn Ishaq's famous early biography of Muhammad, Sirat Rasul, we read, "So I Muhammad read it, and he Gabriel departed from me. And I awoke from my sleep, and it was as though these words were written on my heart. Now none of God's creatures was more hateful to me than an ecstatic poet or a man possessed, I could not even look at them. I thought, woe is me, poet or possessed, never shall Quraysh Muhammad's tribe and kinsmen say this of me. I will go to the top of the mountain and throw myself down that I may kill myself and gain rest. So I went forth to do so, and then when I was midway on the mountain, I heard a voice from heaven saying, O Muhammad, thou art the apostle of God and I am Gabriel." The reference to poet or possessed comes from the notion that Arabs contemporary with Muhammad believed that poets created their poetry under the inspiration of demons. At-Tabari, one of Islam's most highly respected early historians, says, the pre-Islamic Arabs believed in the demon of poetry, and they thought that a great poet was directly inspired by demons. After the terrible experience, Muhammad returned home to his wife Khadijah. Muhammad was still terribly disturbed by the encounter. Then Allah's apostle returned with the inspiration, his neck muscles twitching with terror till he entered upon Khadijah and said, "Cover me. Cover me." They covered him till his fear was over, and then he said, "O Khadijah, what is wrong with me?" Then he told her everything that had happened and said, "I fear that something may happen to me." But it was not only Muhammad who suspected a demonic source to his revelations. Clearly many of Muhammad's contemporaries also believed that his revelatory experiences were demonic and that he was demon-possessed. Yet they turn away from him and say, tutored, by others, a man possessed. Surah 44:14, Yusuf Ali. And say, what? Shall we give up our gods for the sake of a poet possessed? Surah 37:36, Yusuf Ali. Apparently it was even necessary that Allah come to Muhammad's defense and respond to his critics within the Quran itself. No, your compatriot Muhammad is not mad. He saw him Gabriel on the clear horizon. He does not grudge the secrets of the unseen, nor is this the utterance of an accursed devil. Surah 81:22-25. The Quran is no poet's speech, scant is your faith. It is no soothsayer's divination, how little you reflect. It is revelation from the Lord of the universe. Surah 69:41-42. It is not surprising then that after reading the comments made regarding Muhammad by his contemporaries as well as after studying the nature of Muhammad's revelatory experiences, that many scholars have become convinced that Muhammad was either an epileptic or demon-possessed or both. 6. After discussing some of the specific physical manifestations of Muhammad's experiences, John Gilchrist, a South African Christian author and well-known authority on Islam, finalizes his analysis of the various physical phenomena that accompanied Muhammad's revelatory experiences. It should be pointed out that men can be subjected to a different type of seizure which very closely resembles epilepsy. During the life of Jesus, a young boy was brought to him who was an epileptic, Matthew 17:15, and who suffered extreme forms of epilepsy. He would suddenly fall down, be convulsed and be unable to speak. There is no doubt, however, that this epilepsy was not naturally but demonically induced, as all three records of the incident, in Matthew 17, Mark 9, and Luke 9, state that Jesus exorcised the unclean spirit in the child and healed the boy. Without passing judgment on Muhammad, let it nevertheless be said that anyone subject to occultic influences could well find that seizures similar to epileptic fits would occur at appropriate times and, instead of causing a loss of memory, would have just the opposite effect and leave firmly induced impressions on the recipient's mind. Throughout the world, missionaries have related cases of precisely this nature. To this day, such phenomena are not uncommon among Oriental ecstatics and mystics, and they are widely reported. So while the Apostle Peter describes the experience of the authors of biblical scripture by referring to men who spoke from God as they were moved by the Holy Spirit, 2 Peter 1:21, the experience of Muhammad was a much more direct, ecstatic, and dark experience. It is important to note that none of the biblical prophets ever questioned the source of their revelations. Muhammad's experience was far more similar to the experience of a spiritist or someone who channels spirits than a biblical prophet. Other strange phenomena. Muhammad's frightening spiritual encounters did not end with the examples provided above. On another occasion, Muhammad was bewitched, whereby he literally believed himself to be having sexual relations with his wives when he was actually doing no such thing. Guillaume notes that one Muslim scholar says that the spell lasted for an entire year. This episode of Muhammad's life is well documented in Islam's sacred traditions. Narrated Aisha, one of Muhammad's wives' magic was worked on Allah's apostle so that he used to think that he had sexual relations with his wives while he actually had not. This absolutely bizarre portion of Muhammad's life should be enough to give pause to anyone who might consider Muhammad to be a genuine prophet of God, never mind the greatest of all prophets, as Muslims claim. One can only conclude that in order to have fallen into such a delusional state, Muhammad was indeed either literally demon-possessed or significantly ill, or both. In light of the occultic occurrences that defined Muhammad's initial revelatory experiences, the conclusion is not hard to arrive at for anyone with any genuine spiritual discernment. Of course, the contrast here is so stark when we look at the life of Jesus, who rather than being given over to any form of demonic influence, instead freed numerous people from any such form of oppression. Conclusion. In the final assessment, we see that the revelations of Muhammad, the seeds out of which Islam sprouted, began amidst a violent and dark encounter with some form of spiritual being in the cave of Hira. We have also seen that Muhammad's life contained periods of either significant delusion or blatant spiritual oppression. It is this dimension of Muhammad's life that should indeed be noted as we develop the greater theme of this book. Also, when attempting to discern the primary spiritual source of Islam, it is essential to not only see the dark nature of the initial seed from which Islam sprouted, but even more so its ultimate vision of the future, its fully mature fruit. The demonic and anti-biblical revelations that began in the cave of Hira find their culmination with the killing of every Jew, Christian and non-Muslim in the world. Chapter 12. The Antichrist spirit of Islam. The spirit of Antichrist. While we have already discussed the actual person of the Antichrist, the Bible also talks of an Antichrist spirit. Apart from the one direct reference in the Bible to the Antichrist, there are 4 other times that the word is used in a more general sense by the Apostle John. Each time it is in reference to a particular spirit. This spirit is defined by its denial of some very specific aspects of Jesus' nature and his relationship to God the Father. Following are the verses that describe this Antichrist spirit. This is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming and even now is already in the world. 1 John 4:2-3. Who is the liar? It is the man who denies that Jesus is the Christ. Such a man is the Antichrist. He denies the Father and the Son. No one who denies the Son has the Father. Whoever acknowledges the Son has the Father also. 1 John 2:22-23. Many deceivers, who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh, have gone out into the world. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. 2 John 1:7. From these verses, we learn that the Antichrist is a spirit that is identified as a liar and a deceiver, which specifically denies the following. 1. That Jesus is the Christ/Messiah, the Savior/Deliverer of Israel and the world. 2. The Father and the Son, the Trinity, or that Jesus is the Son of God. 3. That Jesus has come in the flesh. The Incarnation, that God became man. The Antichrist spirit of Islam. The religion of Islam, more than any other religion, philosophy, or belief system, fulfills the description of the Antichrist spirit. The religion of Islam makes it one of its highest priorities to very specifically deny all of the above points regarding Jesus and his relationship to the Father. In fact, it can very fairly be said that Islam literally is a direct polemical response against the above essential Christian doctrines. Regarding the above points, however, Muslims will be quick to argue that Islam teaches that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. But this is really just trickery. While it is true that Islam does retain the title of Messiah for Jesus, when one asks a Muslim to define what the title Messiah actually means in Islam, the definitions given are always hollow and fall entirely short of containing any truly messianic substance. In Islam, Jesus is merely another prophet in a very long line of prophets. Biblically speaking, however, the role of the Messiah, among other things, also entails being a divine priestly savior, a deliverer, and the king of the Jews. As we saw in the earlier chapters about the Muslim Jesus, rather than being a Messiah that saves or delivers Israel and all of his faithful followers in any way, in the Islamic traditions, Jesus instead returns to lead Israel's enemies against her in battle and to kill or convert all Jews and Christians. This would be the equivalent of calling Adolf Hitler, rather than Moses, Israel's deliverer. For now, we see that the Apostle John informs us that just before the final hour, a very specific spirit will dominate the earth. This spirit will deny many of the essential biblical doctrines regarding who Jesus is and what he came to do. Islam epitomizes this spirit perfectly. Tawhid and Shirk. In order to properly understand the Antichrist spirit of Islam, there are 2 doctrines that must first be understood. The first is called Tawhid. It is the most essential belief in Islam. Tawhid refers to the belief in the absolute oneness of God. Islam adheres to the strictest form of Unitarian monotheism possible. In Islam, God is utterly alone. But in order to understand Tawhid, one must understand that it is more than just a doctrine. In Islam, belief in Tawhid is an absolute commandment. And if adherence to Tawhid is the highest and most important commandment in Islam, then the greatest sin is called Shirk. Shirk is the opposite of Tawhid. It is in essence, idolatry. From the Invitation to Islam newsletter published by a Muslim group from Toronto, we read a very telling statement, which helps us to understand exactly how shirk is viewed by Muslims. Murder, rape, child molesting and genocide. These are all some of the appalling crimes which occur in our world today. Many would think that these are the worst possible offenses which could be committed. But there is something which outweighs all of these crimes put together. It is the crime of shirk. Thus many Muslims feel as though either believing in the Trinity, or ascribing divinity to Jesus are both among the greatest sins conceivable. In fact, believing in these essential Christian doctrines is more than just a sin, it is the most heinous of all crimes. In the Muslim mind, shirk refers not only to the beliefs of polytheists, or pagans, but also to the essential historical doctrines of the Christian faith. Below we will examine these three essential doctrines and how Islam specifically denies them. Islam denies the sonship of Christ. The religion of Islam has as one of its foundational beliefs, a direct denial of Jesus as God's Son. This denial is found several times throughout the Quran. In blasphemy indeed are those that say that God is Christ the Son of Mary. Surah 5:17, Yusuf Ali. They say, God hath begotten a son. Glory be to him. He is self-sufficient. His are all things in the heavens and on earth. No warrant have ye for this. Say ye about Allah what ye know not. Surah 10:68, Yusuf Ali. They said, the Most Gracious has begotten a son. You have uttered a gross blasphemy. The heavens are about to shatter, the earth is about to tear asunder, and the mountains are about to crumble. Because they claim that the Most Gracious has begotten a son. It is not befitting the Most Gracious that he should beget a son. Surah 19:88-92, Rashad Khalifa. The Christians call Christ the Son of Allah. That is a saying from their mouth. In this, they but imitate what the unbelievers of old used to say. Allah's curse be on them, how they are deluded away from the truth. Surah 9:30, Yusuf Ali. The Quran literally pronounces a curse on those who believe that Jesus is God's Son. People say such things utter gross blasphemies and are likened to unbelievers or infidels. Without question then, in this regard, Islam is an Antichrist religious system. Remember Jim Hastings' comments from chapter 1? He was the priest in training who converted to Islam. The thing I've always latched to is that there's one God, he doesn't have equals, he doesn't need a son to come do his work. Islam attempts to create an acceptable form of monotheistic worship, yet it not only leaves out the most essential aspects of a saving relationship with God, but it also literally exists to directly confront these things and even calls them the highest forms of blasphemy. Far be it from God that he should have a son. These words encircle the inside of the Dome of the Rock Mosque in Jerusalem. This is the very location where for centuries God's people, the Jews, worshipped in their temple awaiting their Messiah. This is also where Jesus, the Son of God and the Jewish Messiah, will someday rule over the earth. Islam has literally built a monument of utter defiance to this future reality. Islam denies the Trinity. The same claim of blasphemy is also applied to those who believe in the Trinity. They do blaspheme who say, Allah is one of three in a Trinity, for there is no God except one Allah. If they desist not from their word of blasphemy, verily a grievous penalty will befall the blasphemers among them. Surah 5:73, Yusuf Ali. Thus belief in Trinity is also defined as blasphemy. But what is the grievous penalty that shall befall those who believe such things? Well, as we saw in previous chapters, many Muslims are ironically expecting their version of Jesus to return and actually kill these polytheist Trinitarian Christians. And the Quran does not stop at denying that Jesus is the Son of God or that God exists as a Trinity. Islam denies the cross. With tears in his eyes, Paul the Apostle warned the Thessalonians that many live as enemies of the cross of Christ. Thessalonians 3:18. It should not come as a surprise then that Islam also even denies the most central event of all of redemptive history, the crucifixion of Jesus. Speaking to the Jews of Jesus' day, the Quran says that they said, in boast, "We killed Christ Jesus the Son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, but they killed him not nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them, and those who differ therein are full of doubts, with no certain knowledge, but only conjecture to follow, for of a surety they killed him not, nay, Allah raised him up unto himself, and Allah is exalted in power." Wise, Surah 4:157-8, Yusuf Ali. Among Islamic scholars, there are actually numerous conflicting theories regarding exactly what happened to Jesus. For ironically, regarding this issue, it is actually they who are the ones who have only conjecture to follow. But despite the inability of Muslims to arrive at any form of consensus regarding what happened to Jesus, they are very much in agreement on at least one issue: he was not crucified. This passage of the Quran makes at least this much clear. How does the Antichrist spirit of Islam affect Muslims? So we see that Islam very specifically and very deliberately denies all three of the specific doctrines that the Apostle John identifies as defining the Antichrist spirit. And the Quran does not merely deny these doctrines, but actually expresses utter disdain for them, actually cursing those who believe these things, accusing them of gross blasphemy. But how do these Quranic attitudes then affect Muslims? This statement may sound strong, but in all of my years of outreach, interfaith dialogue and casual conversations with those who are not Christians, the two groups that I have personally witnessed express the strongest degree of contempt and mockery toward the gospel have been Satanists and Muslims. Yes, believe it or not, I've actually had quite involved conversations with more than a few Satanists. Now, let me be clear that I am in no way trying to liken all Muslims to Satanists in any way. I have met many wonderful and very decent Muslims who would never express any form of blatant disrespect for Christian doctrine, even if they secretly felt this way. But I am speaking very truthfully when I say that in terms of my personal experiences of witnessing assaults toward the gospel message, only Satanists and Muslims have expressed such a high degree of venomous disgust. While there are indeed many religions and systems of belief that do not agree with the doctrines of Christianity, many which do not even believe in God, only Islam fills the role of a religion that exists to deny core Christian beliefs. And of course, following the lead of the Quran, the three doctrines that are most severely and most often attacked and mocked by Muslims are the doctrines of the Trinity, the divine incarnation, and the atoning sacrifice/crucifixion of Jesus. I recently saw a suggestion by a Muslim on an internet discussion group, for a bumper sticker. It read, "Divine insanity, God died on the cross to save his own creation from his own wrath." One Muslim friend insists on referring to Jesus as a God-man sandwich. I have weathered innumerable accusations that by believing in the historic Christian God I am no different than a pagan polytheistic idol worshipper. Many times, I have been told that the doctrine of the atoning sacrifice of Jesus is as archaic and pagan as a human sacrifice to some kind of volcano god. I have been accused of believing in a God who is a sadistic child abuser. I have seen attempts to liken Jesus' death on the cross to a suicide bombing. I have even weathered the mocking of the Christian God as a bloodthirsty vampire. If you are a Christian and you love God, I am sure these statements grieve you as they grieve me, and I apologize for recalling them. I don't relate these attacks in any way to provoke negative feelings against Muslims. Please do not come away with any such feelings. My reason for relating these examples is to acquaint you with the blatant Antichrist spirit that resides within the religion of Islam and that many Muslims therefore manifest. We should not be surprised then to find that one of the descriptions of the Antichrist is that he will be very fond of uttering great blasphemies against the God of the Bible. The king will do as he pleases. He will say unheard of things against the God of gods. Daniel 11:36. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his saints. Daniel 7:25. The Quran itself expresses such blasphemies. As someone who is in continual dialogue with numerous Muslims from all over the world, I can testify that the blatant Antichrist spirit that we saw expressed in the Quranic passages above, quite often blooms into an overt disdain and utter contempt not only for Christian beliefs but also for Christians themselves. While this is not always the case, should we really be surprised when Muslims act out against those who the Quran literally curses as idolatrous, infidel, blasphemers? And if we are being realistic, should we expect the future of Islam to be given to those Muslims who identify with the Quranic scorn for Christians, or to those who show an amiable attitude despite the curses of their own holy book? And lastly, in regards to whether or not Islam is specifically the Antichrist system that the Bible foretells, there can be no question that this, the second largest, fastest growing religion in the world,